Welcome to the Dire Wolf Show, where we believe that America is exceptional and that our constitutional rights should never be infringed. I am Dire Wolf. On our show, we bring you the truth and debunk fake news. If you love laughing at the insanity of the regressive left, sit back and relax. Boy, do I have a show for you. Welcome back, Wolfpack. Dire Wolf here for our weekly news recap from Behind Enemy Lines on YouTube, where speech is not free and the truth is demonetized. Also now on Rumble, Twitch, and everywhere else that's important.
Alongside you is an actual wolf, apparently.
A pack of wolves. I live among them, and they're also in the audience. Also alongside me is my co-host, Fox Trevize. How you doing, buddy?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. We have a pretty good list of topics to discuss today. A lot of interesting things have happened since we last were on the show. We did miss a week, right?
Yeah, we missed a week, and I think we need to start skipping weeks because the last time that we skipped a week, during the time between when we had streamed the first time and then skipping a week and then streaming after that, CNN Plus had just evaporated itself. And then this time we had before, when our last show, we were bringing to you that the Ministry of Truth had just been started, and then we skipped a week, and then all of a sudden it's evaporated over that time span. So every time Dyer and I seem to skip a week, something bad evaporates. So I think we just need to start skipping a week every week. And then maybe more bad things will go away.
Maybe if we skip next week, the Biden administration will end early.
That one I think is just any day now.
Yeah, that'd probably be less because of us and more because of cardiac issue.
I think the actuary tables are that there's at least a full percentage point chance per day that Joe Biden just keels over.
Yes. That to what degree he actually is currently considered alive, that is.
And there's a 100% chance that Kamala Harris will bend over. So,
Yes. So, on that note, as always, we have a great show for you, and we want to thank our sponsors. You guys make this show possible. It's viewers like you. So, thank you for...
We're getting hit by the disinformation board for the great show every week.
Hey, you know what? If we keep saying it, maybe one day it'll become true.
Yeah, that's a Democrat strategy.
It's the power of positive thinking. So thank you guys for supporting us financially. Kaylet, Ori Main, Nathan, Cameron, Tetris Freak, Slowpoke, Thunder Eric, the White Lion, Timberwolf, the White Wolf, Adder Lupus, and many others. Thank you very much. Please, even if you don't want to support us financially, just like, share, subscribe, get us out there. So our first topic, our opening comment, we have some words of wisdom from Kamala Harris. As always.
We absolutely do.
Climate. That is especially true when it comes to the climate crisis, which is why we will work together and continue to work together to address these issues, to tackle these challenges, and to work together as we continue to work operating from the new norms, rules, and agreements that we will convene to work together on to galvanize global action. With that, I thank you all. This is a matter of urgent priority for all of us, and I know we will work on this together.
That's right. Together, guys. We can do this together by working together to work together on more things that will help us work together. Work together.
Yes. Wow, you could be a vice president talking like that.
I could be. I mean, this is actually the meme of I remember from the original Lego movie way back when there was a scene where they were supposed to be in a business meeting and the Lego cat just said business, 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 numbers, and all the business people loved it. They're like, oh, this is a great presentation. And I feel like that's kind of how the Biden administration runs, is they just say buzzwords and then the Praetorian Guard media just claps like seals for it because I see the applause line, and nobody really knows what's said, but they're really excited about it being said. But that's where you get Kamala just when she's completely off script. She has nothing between her ears except for maybe that mayor that she blew. But she she's got nothing going on. So all she can do when she's off script, and you see this with a lot of leftist politicians, is just repeat buzzwords, because their base loves the buzzwords, whereas the conservative side tends to focus more on, I don't know, things like ideas and strategies and real tangible plans.
Yeah, so she reminds me of the guy in college who is supposed to give a speech on a certain topic, but he did absolutely no prep, didn't research, and doesn't know the topic. So he just, fumbles his way through it, repeating the same line over again. The one line, like the thesis of the speech, right? She didn't do her homework, and it kind of goes with what we already know about her. Is her staff say she doesn't read the briefings, she doesn't read the speeches, she just goes on and gives speeches that are unintelligible and uninformed because she's uninformed, and then she blames the people that work for her for not informing her well enough. She refused to inform herself. The problem is she's not good at even doing teleprompter work. She's not even good at regurgitating information she's given. So she definitely isn't able to think of things on the fly. She's not independently intelligent enough to fake it, fake her way through an answer. Where some politicians, you ask them a question they don't know the answer to, and they have something intelligent sounding they can say that they can avoid answering your question effectively to make it look like they said they know what they're talking about, but avoid looking or revealing that they don't know the answer that you asked for.
Yeah, all of which are great points, and I like the comparison to that guy in college. I'm sure anybody who's been to college or in high school, you've probably had some kind of public speaking class where they forced you at gunpoint and you hated it, and you went up and made a public speech in front of your classmates, who I'm sure you have no problem talking to during the day, but when they tell you you've got to talk for 4 minutes in front of even a small group of people, some of you just collapse into a puddle. I know that. I was there. Everybody was. But the way Kamala Harris's speech right there, that would be considered a not good presentation at any kind of public speaking class. That would be, maybe not failing, but certainly not an A+ by any stretch of the imagination. And we were led to believe that Kamala Harris was the absolute cream of the crop, whereas she's probably just creaming those crops. But there's there's nothing going on there. And then to your point about the kind of people in meetings that just they didn't read the briefs, they don't really know what they're talking about. I deal with this a lot when interfacing with my corporate section of my company, where at the corporate level they like to let's have a meeting to discuss a plan for another meeting. Let's start talking about these vague acronyms that they don't really know the meanings of. Let's talk about getting a working group together, or why don't we task the so and so group to take a look into this and to evaluate what we're doing. And what I'll do on the calls a lot of times is pin them down. Okay, what does that acronym mean? And they usually don't know. Then why did you use it? Who's on that working group? Well, we don't really have that working group, but it'd be nice. Then why did you reference it? What date are they going to do this? Well, we don't really know. Then why did you say that you're planning on doing it soon? So you gotta pin these people down. And you see stuff like that with like Peter Doocy, who we're going to have some clips on tonight. And a lot of the right wing media, a lot of our quote unquote Republicans pounce, and just the evil of white supremacy. A lot of it's just asking, if you look at what it is, it's just asking questions about specific things. Like, oh, you say you're going to bring down inflation. When and how? You're a white supremacist. That's how. Oh, okay.
Republicans pounced.
Yeah,
asking what your plan is.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see this with the Disinformation Governance Board that we'll talk about here in a few stories, about how merely asking the question, why are you doing that, caused it to just utterly collapse, just completely collapse. And so that is why you wonder, what's the point of the media, the mainstream media? It's to insulate these completely unskilled, incompetent politicians, to allow them to hide behind that. Whereas if you get something like a Fox News in there, or God forbid, in real, true, independent media, and then they ask a real question, the narrative completely collapses. Work together with who? To do what? When are you going to do it? What are you going to do? What are the metrics by which you're measuring your success? Give us names of the people that you're going to be working together with. What do you mean by working together? Otherwise, you're just talking just to talk.
So have you ever heard of the phrase snow job?
Yes, though I think that means something different for Kamala.
Okay, so I think this was a very, very feeble attempt at doing a snow job
And
where,
if anybody knows how to do a snow job, it's Kamala.
yeah, she has lots of experience, I thought.
Yes.
So no, a snow job is where someone who doesn't really know what you do is trying to gauge your experience, and they ask you about your job, and you take a bunch of information you do know and throw at them rapid fire. So there's so much information coming at them that they can't really evaluate any little bit of it to whether or not it really makes sense. And then you put them with so much information, they're like, okay, it sounds like you know what you're doing, and then move on, right? But that only works if the people you're talking to know your job less than you do, and you actually can speak intelligibly with some facts.
Yeah, well, and so the current administration, I mean, they gotta, I don't envy their position, because previous administrations, even Biden's previous administration under Obama, the economy, there was very specific reasons why the economy collapsed that weren't directly Obama's fault. And then despite Obama's attempts to slow down the recovery, just the engine of the U.S. economy picked up the pace after the 2008 collapse, in spite of the bad policies. And so they've had a lot of, just over the last several decades, just kind of luck with having and inheriting an economy that's running well despite their bad policies. But after COVID, after the way that we've levered up our debt the last 2 decades, and then the way that their policies are now impacting both of those things, the economy just isn't able to keep up. So normally what you're saying, normally people who don't know what their job is, ostensibly their job is to make everyone's lives better, right? To run the country and to keep the economy going. Normally, it didn't really matter what they did. Those things sort of just happened. But as things are starting to fall apart progressively faster, and it's more specifically related to what it is that they're doing, well, now you've got a lot of people saying, well, I don't necessarily know what their job is, but they're clearly not doing it. And the more people think that, oh, they're clearly not doing their job, the more they're going to be focusing on politics, the more they're going to be watching and focusing on clips of Kamala Harris like this and seeing that she's saying nothing. And that is one of the big reasons why Republicans will end up sweeping in November.
And I remind you, this is only one clip out of many possible clips we could have picked of her and Biden sounding incoherent. They're an endless supply. Let's move on to our next story.
Alrighty. Well,
so
Ginger Snap
Psaki is gone.
Ginger Snap has left. Well, she's snapped out. She snapped out of the building there. So
she finally snapped.
The Twizzler lady. My favorite one is Andrew Wilkow, who calls her potato chips, and I don't know why, but it's just funny. I'm sure that there was a reason that I missed, but he just calls her potato chips.
Yeah, I love walking in on a joke at the tail end and not knowing the context for it.
Exactly. That's a good conversation with Dyer.
Exactly. So this month, Jen Psaki stepped down from being the official speaker of of disinformation for former Vice President Biden and current imbecile Joe Biden. Jen's stepping down was no surprise. She has said publicly that for about a year that she was planning on stepping down around this month. Her stated reason for stepping down was so that she could spend more time with her children.
She calls them, quote, children because, well, she wanted her offspring.
Yeah.
Which
if she
apparently separates from unwanted offspring, which are merely fetuses.
Yeah, well, because we found out that when they tried to pass a federal abortion law that would allow abortion up to the day of delivery, we found that the only difference between a child and a fetus is whether or not that child is wanted. That's what the Democrats.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, that's how most rights work in this country, is that your right to like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is dependent on how I define you as a person, right? We have a long history that's the best, that's the good side of history, that's the correct side of history, is the people that say, well, you're not a person, therefore you have no rights.
Right. So when black people were enslaved and killed, it's because they weren't people.
Exactly, and that was clearly the right side of history, right?
Wait. And then gays are thrown from buildings in the Middle East because they're not people.
Well, yeah, but Allah commanded it, so
Yeah, but Allah also says that people who aren't Muslim are also not human. So that's why there's been a whole lot of holy wars.
Well, exactly. I mean, if we would just, all lay down and die by the sword, there wouldn't be any more war, Dyer. I mean, clearly this is our fault. or Western
the
aggression of just wanting to exist.
The Germans, they justified their war on every other racial group other than a very specific group of whites.
There is
they
this.
Weren't human.
I know that the left would say that it's the right doing this, but it really is the left, where you have a group of people that just merely wants to exist, and the left is like, I took it personally. You have to die.
Exactly. They're fighting for the right to tell you what your rights are and enforce on you their will, whereas we are fighting to be left alone.
Yes, libertarianism is the only way forward. Alrighty, so Saki, who considers her offspring children, what a bigot. She doesn't know what their gender is. If she didn't want her children, she would have called them clumps of cells that can presumably speak, talk, and walk. I don't know why I said speak and talk twice. It's kind of
weird.
I don't know. Oh, somebody else is speaking.
No, guys.
All right. So Jen Psaki, potato chips, was replaced by Karen Jean Perry, who, from this point further, will be referred to as Karen. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, well, isn't her name pronounced with a French accent? And to which I respond to you, France does not exist. So now I know you are wondering, what is this new
prerequisite qualifications?
None of those syllables are in what you typed.
I just realized as we were reading it. Sorry, yeah. But what are her qualifications?
You wrote press secretaries and just put it into one word. Why don't you read what you meant?
So I bet you're wondering, what were the new press secretary's qualifications?
I am obviously...
And thankfully, she told us what they were on her first day.
Exactly. So what qualifies you to be press secretary?
I am obviously acutely aware that my presence at this podium represents a few firsts. I am a Black, gay, immigrant woman, the first of all three of those to hold this position. I would not be here today if it were not for generations of barrier-breaking people before me. I stand on their shoulders. If it were not for generations of barrier-breaking people before me, I would not be here. Almost a year ago, I said at this podium that this podium, this room, this building belonged to the American people. We work.
So there you have it. She is qualified by being a gay, lesbian, Black person. She appears to be little as well. I don't know how tall she is.
And retarded, so there's special needs as well.
Exactly. And in case you guys were wondering, what are Dyer and I's qualifications? Well, we are tall, handsome, well endowed, reasonably intelligent, and we identify as being correct.
Correct.
Exactly.
So,
we had a lot of barriers we broke through, a lot of glass ceilings we had to shatter to get here.
Yeah, she's also thanking all those people who were barrier breakers, like the men who voted for women's suffrage, right?
Exactly.
The white men who voted for that, and all the white men who voted and fought to end slavery. All those barrier breakers.
Well, I mean, they're really just they were stealthily fighting for white supremacy, Dyer. Obviously.
Right. But they weren't Democrat barrier breakers,
yeah,
because it's been pretty one-sided as far as history is concerned about what party was opposed to slavery and Jim Crow and destroying Black communities.
It's a real good thing that she got those rights before somebody decided to just call her a clump of cells.
Yeah, very convenient.
Sorry, she's a gay clump of cells.
Still a clump of cells.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
This week, Biden tweeted that raising taxes on corporations would lower inflation. Now
did he say it 3 times?
No.
Oh, well, then I don't know if he meant it. 'Cause if you remember last year, he said that his plan would reduce inflation.
I think he was just like a record skipping.
Yeah, it's that's how you know that he's being sincere, as if he repeats himself over and over again. I don't know that's a record skipping. I think that if he only says it once, I think that indicates that he's reading it off a teleprompter and he doesn't believe it.
Right. or he's an idiot. Either way, so he said that raising taxes on corporations would lower inflation. Now, the statement that statement from Karen's new boss is completely idiotic. It is now Karen's job to explain and defend that absurd statement. Here's how she did it.
Not very well.
This Twitter account posted the other day, you want to bring down inflation, let's make sure the wealthiest corporations pay their fair share. Mm-hmm. How does raising taxes on corporations reduce inflation?
So, are you talking about a specific tweet?
He tweeted, you want to bring down inflation, let's make sure the wealthiest corporations pay their fair share.
Look, we have talked about this past year about making sure that the wealthiest among us are paying their fair share. And that is important to do, and that is something that the president has been working on every day when we talk about inflation and lowering costs. And so it's very important that as we're seeing costs rise, as we're talking about how to build a America that's safe, that's equal for everyone, and doesn't leave everyone behind. That is an important part of that as well.
But how does raising taxes on corporations lower the cost of gas, the cost of a used car, the cost of food for everyday Americans?
So look, I think we encourage those who have done very well, right? Especially those who care about climate change.
Yes, okay, I understand that people need to pay their fair share. How does doing that have any impact on inflation at all? After she just answered for almost 60 seconds and did not answer that at all. We're not the ones who linked those together. Joe Biden linked those together. Joe Biden said, no, the reason for raising taxes on the wealthy isn't only so that they pay their fair share, but also it will reduce inflation. Like, he's the one who linked those two things together. Peter Doocy is merely asking, by what mechanism does that reduce inflation? And they have no answer because it's unanswerable. It has no connection. It in fact has the opposite connection. But Joe Biden will just say things. It's the current "I support current thing" meme, where Joe Biden will say a policy that's Democrat, that's been a Democrat policy for a long time, is raising taxes. That's always been a Democrat policy. And now, to justify it, he's just saying, well, whatever current bad things are happening, that's the reason why we need to do this. It doesn't really matter if they're related at all. We just need to do it. We just need to do it for climate change. We need to do it because it's fair. We need to do it because it'll reduce inflation. It'll reduce gas prices. It'll, just whatever ails the country, Democrat policies are always the solution. It doesn't, don't look too deeply in the mechanism by which they'll solve your problem. Just know that any problem that you have will always be solved by whatever policy the Democrats are currently supporting. Every time.
Yep.
To support a fair tax code that doesn't charge manufacturers, workers, cops, builders a higher percentage of their earnings.
Dyer, what would help you out more, knowing that Jeff Bezos is paying probably a 25 to 30% income tax is probably about what you're paying in income tax. Would it make you feel better to know that he's paying the same income tax that you are? Or would it make you feel better to, fill up your gas tank for not $6 a gallon?
Yeah,
and buy baby formula?
I'll bet it's the hierarchy of needs, right? Most people are going to care a lot about shelter, food, water, taking care of their family, safety, and they're not going to give a flying shit about Bezos or any other rich person as long as they are first having what they need. And right now, our country has a large population of people, and it's a growing population, that don't have those basic needs, are barely getting by directly because of Biden's policy. So no, they don't worry about taxing corporations more. They're worried about getting less taxes and more jobs.
Now you see why they have to erroneously link it to inflation, right? Because just by itself, right now, when you can't buy baby formula and you can barely fill up your gas tank, you aren't, you're that hierarchy of needs. You're more worried about survival than you are about whether or not Bezos is getting his due. Worrying about whether or not Bezos is paying his fair share is a very luxurious concern. It's a very first world concern. When the economy is collapsing as it currently is, and there's shortages all over the place, your concerns become less luxurious. They become more about, again, survival. So what is one of the biggest things impacting your survival ability right now? Well, it's inflation, because that's what's making everything extremely expensive. So while the Democrats talked about paying your fair share for the last 50 years, and up until about 3 days ago, never did paying your fair share have anything to do with inflation. Well, now, because that hierarchy of needs is shifting to be more dramatic, more survival oriented, well, the Democrats, they still want to pass that policy, so they have to link it to something that is more impactful to you. Again, because you're trying to survive, you don't necessarily care what Bezos is doing as much anymore, but you do care if, wow, Jeff Bezos isn't paying his fair share, and that's causing inflation. I'm not going to question how it causes inflation, but because Joe Biden just said it did. So now all of a sudden you care about Democrat policies. It doesn't matter what your problem is. Democrat policies are always a solution to it. And so whatever they got to do to link it to the current problem, they will. But again, think about it. How long have the Democrats been talking about paying their fair share? When have they ever, up until 3 days ago, talked about paying your fair share being directly related to inflation? Also, are we to believe that, rich people have been, quote unquote, not paying their fair share in income tax, well, since income tax was invented, basically, or, as the Democrats tell it anyways. So it took like 100 years for that to finally manifest as inflation. We had 100 years of rich people not paying their fair share, and all of a sudden it just manifests.
And Biden himself have been saying that they're going to tax the rich for a very long time, and that's how they rile up their base, but they don't actually ever do it. Anytime they pass a tax, they also pass loopholes to those taxes. They're not going to actually...
Like the Chinese energy deal loophole that Hunter Biden took.
Exactly. So what they're doing is... they're trying to make there be a bad guy that they can blame everything on that isn't them. It has to be someone else's fault. And blaming the rich, well, they're a smaller population than the people that are trying to get to vote for them, right? And also the actual rich Democrats who, when they hear that Biden or his admin are planning on taxing the rich, they know they're not included in that. They know it's only going to go towards the people that don't support Biden.
Yeah, and who are they really going to be taxing? And we know this. I mean, this is like, I can't believe we're talking about this again, because the Democrats have been talking about, quote unquote, taxing the rich forever. This goes all the way back to Obama and Joe the Plumber. I mean, and even back before then. But who are they really talking about taxing? I mean, they're talking about taxing small businesses. Small businesses will tend to have a lot of cash flow, but not necessarily a lot of earnings. Joe Biden says, well, we're not going to tax anybody making under $400,000. Well, first off, that's just a lie. But you could be having $400,000 of cash flow in a small business and not be making any profit, not making enough money to pay yourself even a $30,000 a year salary. That would be very common. My company that I work for is a large, by no means a small business company, not anymore. But we're pushing $250-300 million a year, but we're only extracting a few million out of that for profits, which sounds like a lot, but not for a company of hundreds of people. And that's a lot of cash flow to generate a very small amount of profit. And so you're looking at, mid and small level businesses that have a lot of cash flow getting taxed on all that cash flow, but they're not actually turning a profit. And what profit they do turn, Joe Biden wants to gobble up. What's that going to do? It's going to continue to collapse small businesses, which is the biggest employer in the United States. Most people are employed by a business that has under 100 employees. And so you're going to have this further collapse of these small businesses, which is going to further collapse the middle class, which will further push people's buying habits towards the big box stores like Amazon. Jeff Bezos loves the idea of taxing the quote unquote rich. But you'd have to raise taxes to like infinite percent to get at Jeff Bezos's money. I mean, you would actually have to just full scale seize his assets. You're not going to be able to tax him out of his assets. So there's no way to do that. But you can tax a small business to death, and we've seen it happen before. And it would appear that they're trying to make it happen again.
Or you could organize a pandemic response that conveniently destroys small businesses as well.
Yeah. Should I hop back on script here? So while you're
Yep.
highlighting this? Alrighty. So, let's see here. So Karen said a lot of words, and they even seemed to form complete sentences every now and then. A lot of ums in there, though. We won't fault her for that because we don't want to be judged by that. However, if you listen carefully, you will have noticed that she's completely incoherent and did not answer the question. Jeff Bezos has recently responded to Joe Biden's tweet saying that it should be reviewed by Biden's new disinformation governance board, which is pretty funny. But I have a feeling that Biden's Ministry of Truth won't be taking on any new cases for a while, but we'll get to that in a second. First, we need to talk about Jeff Bezos's internet drama, mostly because Dyer wrote it into the script and only because he thinks it's funny that Bezos is having buyer's remorse because Dyer is a dork and thinks those things are funny. All right.
So
All in the script.
Well, guilty. I'm a dork. So the Biden admin defended his position by saying that they would lower the deficit by raising taxes on corporations, which would lower inflation. Biden also claimed that he has already reduced the deficit by $360
Here's
billion.
a way to reduce the deficit. Stop spending, you adults.
Exactly.
It's a spending problem, not an income problem.
wasn't-
Well, and the deficit, that's not even okay, so you know the difference between debt and deficit.
Yes, the deficit is like how much currently we're bringing in versus how much we're spending.
Yeah, it's the current year's shortfall is the deficit. The debt is the cumulative deficit over all previous years.
Right.
So the deficit right now, the shortfall is like $2 to $4 trillion. I mean, it's an unimaginable amount. Like our budget used to be $4 trillion, and then now that's the deficit. You are not going to be able to tax $4 trillion out of the economy. The GDP is like what, like 21 trillion dollars. You can't tax almost 20% out of that and not have consequences. Are you kidding me? That is absolutely insane. You cannot tax your way out of the current deficit shortfall. The only way is to stop spending.
To spend drastically less. And he's bragging about, he's trying to make it sound like the average person will think, oh, he reduced how much money we owe by $360 billion. No. He reduced the deficit that he's claiming by 360, which means we still have a massive deficit of I think it was 870 billion. No, that was the drop. Shit. No, they have a gigantic deficit, and this is just going to reduce it by a small amount. At least that's what he said. So he said that he reduced the deficit by 360 billion during his first year in comparison to Trump's last year.
Okay, yeah. So the
what
2021
he wants to ignore is that Trump's last year had extraordinarily high short-term spending related to COVID.
Yeah, the 2021 deficit was 2.8 trillion. So again, the GDP being roughly $20 trillion, you want to pull like 10 to 20% out of the GDP in taxes, because that's where that would come from. It would directly come out of the GDP. So I don't know, what do you think that would do to the I don't know, the economy if you just yanked 10% out of the GDP?
Probably nothing good.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, so in Trump's final year, there was a bunch of quote-unquote emergency bills that spent, what was it? I think the final tab was about $6.5 trillion extra dollars, something like $6 to $7 trillion of COVID spending.
Over 10 years.
Yeah, well, still. So you had this gigantic black swan event followed by reckless government spending, bipartisan spending at that. And then Joe comes in and, well, yeah, we're not going to have to spend as much because we already spent all of that money. All that money was already allocated. Joe Biden could have just canceled it if he canceled all the other Trump era stuff. He didn't cancel that though. And so, yeah, obviously, if for instance, Dyer, if you had a bad storm go through your area and a tree fell on your roof, and it cost you a couple $1,000 to get that roof repaired in the first month, Well, the next month, your expenses are probably not going to be as much as the previous month. It's not that you're, oh, well, look at me, like I'm saving the family so much money because I lowered our deficit this month. Like, well,
look,
no,
honey, I reduced our monthly spending.
like, well, yeah, but you'd have to pay for the roof this month. Like, that one doesn't count. It's special
but I actually
spending.
went and bought $1,000 gun, so like I reduced the deficit by 1,000.
Exactly. So it cost you $2,000 to replace your roof in January, and then in February you bought $1,000 gun, and you're like, look, I saved the family $1,000. No, you've just spent $3,000 extra dollars we don't have.
Damn it, Dyer! Stop buying guns.
I will never tell you to do that. Buy more guns. Buy more guns. That is financial advice from Fox Reviews. I will stand by it. Buy more guns and ammo.
Yeah, but if you're gonna get a rifle, a AR, it's probably one that's more than $1,000 for a good one.
Oh yes, at least you can get a good AR for less than $1,000.
Now haven't prices gone up drastically?
I mean, they have, and one of the things you're going to run into is a budget AR that costs you $450. Well, maybe in 2019 it costs you $450. That is going to shoot just as well as a $3,000 rifle. It's if you are a new shooter or even just a moderate shooter, your aim will make the difference between you won't be able to tell the difference between a $500 and a $3,000 gun depending on what your aim is. Now, if you're real high level proficiency like Dyer, where you can shoot the flea off of a tick at 70,000 miles, then maybe it'll matter. But for most of you, it's not going to matter. Get what you can get.
To disinformation board about that one.
Get what you can get. Learn how to shoot it well, and when times are good, maybe treat yourself with a luxury car. But, just as most people do, you drive the beater to work just to get the job done. And maybe when you're a little bit older, after your finances settle, you buy yourself a nice sports car. That's how you should treat your guns. You got to get the workhorses at any price. Lower the better. Not like a High Point or something like that. Jeez.
Have standards.
Yes, but you can do just fine on a budget rifle for less than $1,000. Even now, I think maybe you could get one for like $600 or $700. The problem, and I had this problem when I bought my rifle, is those budget rifles are just as good, but because everybody's panic buying guns, there isn't any. So like when I went to go buy a rifle, I had to get a Gucci gun because that was the only one left. All the regular ones were sold out. So that might be the issue that you run into.
Look at Fox's Gucci gun privilege.
Yes, exactly. Oh man, no, poor Fox. Well, this is just the only one they had left was this nice showroom floor quality one. Now I have the FN15, which I actually have a model number. It's in the low thousands. It's like 1040 or something like that. Like very, very rare gun, and it's gorgeous.
Yeah, when Fox fired my gun, he's like, ugh, I can barely even hold this thing. It's not good enough quality compared to what I have. Oh.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, then I think I shot your barrel out too.
No, the barrel's fine.
You're like, oh, go ahead, keep shooting. Like, Dyer, it's literally smoking. I think 100 rounds was enough.
No, we must do 1,000.
Like, not until the barrel catches fire.
I want red hot, glowing barrel. Or you're not trying.
We'll do the Ted Cruz thing where you fry bacon on it and just ruin the gun.
God, terrible idea. Don't do that.
What were we talking about?
So guns. I was saying that he was bragging about his first year of spending. Biden's first year of spending being $360 billion less in deficit compared to Trump's last year during COVID. Obviously, not indicative of the previous 3 years of Trump spending. Though I would say I still think the GOP and Trump spent more and had maintained too high of a deficit. There shouldn't have been a deficit. So I'm not saying Trump is good there. However, compared to Biden, he was far more fiscally responsible. And also the money that was spent was actually going towards the things Americans needed.
Well, and I would say, too, America is a little bit more tolerant. Even the staunch rightists are more tolerant of high deficits and high debt. If, in fact, you can go to the store and get baby formula.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
So the exchange that we were told is that the Federal Reserve would, create 2% inflation every year, that they would manage the money supply, and that, the big execs on Wall Street, they would get all these sweetheart debt deals and basically get to extract money out of your savings via the interest rate. But we do all this, and in exchange, you have cheap gas, plentiful baby formula, 80,000 kinds of bread, and Twitter. And that worked for a little while. And, the people on the right, the libertarians, the Rand Pauls, all budget hawking say, this is going to cause our collapse. Well, nobody really cared. I mean, it was very academic, and, people cared in an academic sense. But as long as there was bread on the shelves and gas at the pumps, we got other problems, right? Now that that's not necessarily the truth, now that those chickens have come home to roost, America really is a lot less tolerant of this deficit. And Joe Biden trying to play these games by using, I'll use my first year against Trump's last year, or, when it's convenient, we'll switch it back to the first year, or we'll ignore the reasons why, it's a national emergency, that sort of stuff. I think people are going to start seeing through that pretty quickly. I don't know that people are going to see through that. Obviously, I think enough of them will by the time we get to the midterm election. But I think that the pain that we felt now in the last year, and then in the next 6 months leading up to the midterms, I think that's going to be absolutely nothing compared to the pain that's going to be felt in the 2 years leading up to the next presidential election. And I think that you're going to still see a red wave this time, definitely. But the red wave, I would expect by 2024, you're going to see an electoral college something like 300, 350 for whoever the winner is. I think that the American people will be in a lot of pain. Again, all of this talk about the economics and debt and all that stuff, all very academic and fun to talk and fight about back when times were good. But now that stuff's bad, now that there's shortages and we're looking at even more shortages and we're looking at extreme hyperinflation prices, the pain that we're going to feel in the next 2 years is going to be off the charts. And I do not think that Joe Biden or his team are capable of spinning their way out of it, as is evident by the fact that they're all awful at speaking.
Yes. So the thing is, a lot of that short-term spending, that extra high spending during Trump's last year, was actually scheduled to end early into the first year of Biden. And it was expected reduction in the deficit spending by $870 billion if Biden just did nothing and continued with Trump's policies. It would have naturally reduced by $870 billion. So in fact, since Biden only reduced it $360 because of his policies in doing additional spending, he actually did worse than Trump. His policies spent more money and didn't reduce the deficit as much as it would have on its own if he just continued Trump's policies. He saddled a massive amount of debt on taxpayers, which will require higher deficits, more debt for many years to come. And that's not even including what the knock-on effects of the recession that he's likely caused.
I think we're headed for a depression. Bezos posted on Twitter that Senator Manchin had saved the Democrats from themselves by preventing them from injecting even more stimulus into the already overheated economy. So you've got Senator Manchin, who's the devil of the Democrat Party, and then Bezos, who's supposed to be their sweetheart, the sweetheart of the Democrats. He's been very helpful to the left the last decade, and now he's getting to reap what he's sown, basically. And I don't think that Bezos wants to see a destroyed economy either. I think he and a lot of these other space billionaires, they have a vested interest in, the world continuing to spin. You don't get to go to space if the entire, world industry collapses. You don't get to do that. So I suddenly think that he, as opposed to before, now has a vested interest in, keeping the world alive. And the Democrats are clearly not doing that for him. And so now you have Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, who's one of the biggest cheerleaders and purveyors of disinformation on behalf of the left, along with Manchin, who is a Democrat, now turning against the main party. And that actually really does go to show, because I don't think that Bezos is suddenly like a libertarian or conservative or anything. Definitely not. And I don't think anybody has any illusions about Senator Manchin being a conservative at all. I think that they are very prime examples of the left me, or the left raced off to the left, and you had some people who stayed stationary. And I think Bezos was just a classic moderate leftist, certainly far too left, but moderate by their standards. And the left, as they continued to run the left, especially on economic policies, I think he's starting to see through that. And now you see him turning against the Democrat Party. And I think that'll be interesting to see what the Washington Post does leading up to the midterms, because I'm betting that they're not going to be so, so generous to Joe Biden as they were in the previous election.
Yep.
And all of which is to say, I enjoy watching them fight with each other. And I don't know that it really matters because they're still bad people, but it is fun to see them kind of splinter and fight amongst themselves.
Bezos is not in any way a good person, has done a lot of damage to our country, has continued to do so. But it's kind of nice for him to be getting frustrated with his own cohorts, for there to be disunity in the Democratic Party, because any suffering he's having is just desserts, is caused by their own actions. So good. I'm glad he's upset. So this criticism from Bezos led to a comical back and forth on Twitter between the Biden admin and Jeff Bezos, leading to the press secretary Karen dismissing Bezos' criticism on the grounds of him being wealthy. So of course he's opposed to taxing the rich, right?
Wait. So is the barrier to entry of your opinion mattering as whether or not you're wealthy? Can we? I mean, if that's the standard that they want to take, I'll take it. That is a deal I will take today. If I think that on net we would be better. I think on net we would be a lot better off.
It is the laziest counter argument I've ever heard from press secretary. It is so brainless. Oh, this is a poignant comment made criticizing our actual policies. Oh yeah? Well, you have money, so your opinion doesn't count. Okay, that's what you want to go with. Sure. Just tell me you don't have an argument without telling me you don't have an argument. Or maybe Bezos saw how Trump was able to reduce taxes in 2017, and he saw how it led to, he saw, like the rest of us saw, how it led to increased economic growth and increased tax revenue. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but they kept saying that Trump's tax plan didn't grow the economy and wasn't a tax break for the average person. Well, that was a lie. The Democrats repeated that over and over again, but people earning between $40,000 and $50,000 a year saw a reduction of 18%.
Nazi fags.
How dare you?
Jews.
Why would you do that?
Thank you, Adder Lupus. He says, "Hey guys, hope you're having a good Sunday."
Thank you very much.
Let's see here. He says, "I am struggling to breathe due to allergies, but fun times." I am sorry that you're struggling to breathe. Hopefully you can get that solved. Maybe some essential oils.
They keep saying we should try to be nice to Mother Earth, but Mother Earth is a dick to us.
Yeah. I'm definitely not a doctor, but maybe like some over-the-counter Allegra will help. I was skeptical that would help me, but somebody made me take one once, and I was like, oh wow, that actually does help. So
yes,
maybe give it a go.
He's Claritin. So getting back to the tax plan. The tax plan provided a reduction in taxes for most Americans.
I'm surprised you have anything in your nose that can like be a reaction site for pollen.
Thanks. I don't do drugs, guys. I work with heavy chemicals.
Just burnt out all your olfactory cells.
That was one lie. And then, so Bezos likely saw how the reducing of taxes on corporations and average citizens led to a lot of economic growth and more tax revenue. So maybe he's like, well, that worked under Trump. Maybe we should, not do the exact opposite under Biden.
Yeah, but I mean, is it really about the revenue, or is it about punishing rich people? Because
it's actually about keeping the people who are poor.
Oh, well, have you considered that you would feel better about not being able to find formula for your baby if you knew that Jeff Bezos, had attacks on him that caused him no.
I know it might be shocking to you, but there's actually no substantive connection, no functionality between him paying more money in taxes and there being baby formula in the store.
So the only way I could see this working for the Democrat base is if they, and they may, they may in fact be correct about this. If the Democrat base is so irrational that they are not able to prioritize their hierarchy of needs, and even though they have a starving baby and they can't fill up their car, they still care more about whether or not Jeff Bezos is paying taxes, that is a completely irrational position, but it may well describe a lot of the Democrat base. And the Democrat base doesn't really care if there are, logical causal linkages between cause and effect. Maybe that's the bet that they're making, is that the Democrat base is irrational economic actors, and they also don't have any care about logic. They could be correct on that. I don't know. They may, in fact, this might actually be a good gambit to keep their base going, though I don't think it's going to be convincing to moderates or conservatives in any way.
You know what? You might be able to convince me that the same people who are willing to murder babies, right before they're born, and that are trying to chop off their dicks and breasts when they're older, you might be able to convince me that they are so detached from humanity that they would not feel as a priority to feed their babies. You might be able to convince me of that if you try hard enough.
Yes.
So none of all that. Well, that's a great way to start a sentence. It's your paragraph.
Yeah, I gotta read this part. Okay, so Biden and his administration are blatantly lying about how his policies are affecting the economy, which brings us back to Biden's new Disinformation Governance Board, or the DGB. What are the chances that they will correct Biden on his disinformation about the economy and Democrat policies?
Not a single chance, because on Monday, the DHS decided to shut down the Disinformation Governance Board.
That's actually not true. They paused it. Did you not?
Yeah.
Yes.
In the same article that says pause, they also have a quote saying shut down.
Yeah,
so,
they shut it down. So I'll correct this afterwards, but basically they put it on a 75-day pause, and then they're going to reactivate it in 75 days with a new person and probably with less publicity. So while we talk about this, it is great that it's at least temporarily suspended, but this is by no means a win or a victory, because they will just secretly, quietly bring it back online in a few months when nobody's watching or paying attention.
That's predictable.
Yes.
But still, the headline was that they paused it, and in the article they had a quote from one of the officials saying that it was shut down, even if temporarily.
Yes.
And that happened after only 21 days. It didn't even last as long as CNN Plus or even 2 Scaramucci's.
Yeah, so I would say CNN Plus is a new period of time representing 24 days. And so, yeah, it didn't even last a full CNN Plus, which is pretty wild.
And on Wednesday morning, Jan Jankowicz officially
Nina
resigned.
Jarovdicks.
Whatever, Jarovdicks. Yes. Jarovdicks officially resigned from her role within the department, which was supposed to be the lead role. Jarovdicks, who had been picked to lead the Biden's Ministry of Truth, was on record calling the Hunter laptop fake, and she had supported the Russia collusion lie, among many other lies she had supported publicly. The backlash against Jarovdicks and the completely dystopian nature of the Ministry of Truth led to enough backlash from both left and right that they were forced to scrap the project for at least temporarily. So, did the Disinformation Board, did disinformation defeat the Disinformation Governance Board? Let's hear from Karen.
Thank you, Crane. A follow-up to the Disinformation Board. Last week, you guys said that you needed this Disinformation Governance Board at DHS to make sure that freedom of speech is protected across the country and that these platforms are not used for forms of disinformation. So what changed?
Look, the Department of Homeland Security, they began their statement repeating that the board had been intentionally mischaracterized, which is a little bit of what you were asking me, and they were explicit about what it does and does not do. It was never about.
Wait. What was the mischaracterization? Was the mischaracterization that it was supposed to be supporting free speech? And defending the government? I would say that would be what was the mischaracterization, but I think that they mean something else, right?
So I listened to them. I forget what his name was. I think he's the leader of the DHS, but it was an official who was trying.
Mayorkas.
Yes, Mayorkas. Thank you. He was defending what he thought the misinformation about the Disinformation Governance Board was, and he was saying that people were falsely implying that it has an enforcement capability. And they're saying, well, because it can't enforce anything on its own, this working group can't enforce anything, well, then all these fears are unfounded.
Well, it's an intelligence agency. I mean, the CIA and the NSA don't really have an enforcement division, but they can still harass the fuck out of you. I mean, it's not about whether or not they've got an official enforcement arm. It's about intelligence gathering and the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment. It's not...
Well, that statement's also... stupid, because they are still part of the Department of the DHS. They still have connections. They're still employees of the intelligence agencies.
Yeah,
that
talk
do
about
have
missing
enforcement.
the point.
They are members of other government bodies that do have enforcement capabilities, and the point of the working group was to coordinate their efforts.
Well, and then, okay, so if they're not an enforcement agency, what are they doing baked into an executive board? Like, I mean, this is an executive branch bureaucracy. The point of the executive is enforcement. So if you have an agency within the executive that doesn't have any enforcement capabilities, then it doesn't belong there. But, you know, we have a lot of those things because we have the Fourth Amendment. So really the executive shouldn't have any intelligence agencies that are focused domestically, which is why they have to, you know, come up with these creative names of it. So actually that would be Mayorkas admitting that it's in fact unconstitutional to have it because it has no enforcement purpose. Therefore, it's not an executive branch function. Therefore, it shouldn't be in the executive branch.
Yeah,
but I rest my case.
It's like the police setting up a group of police officers to discuss policies within the office on how they're going to approach certain crimes. Now, that little group there doesn't have any enforcement, but all of them are police officers who actively, when they're not part of that group, they're not having those discussions, are going out and taking actions within their actual careers that are based off those conversations.
It's like saying like the 911 operator, because 911 offices don't have enforcement capabilities. Yeah, but they call the people who do.
Right, exactly. It's a better analogy. I like that.
Like, yeah. Oh, go ahead, call 911. They can't do anything. Yeah, but they can call people who can.
Yeah. They said the police.
Yes. So, I mean, it's just like, I don't know. Obviously, it's disinformation, right? It's intentionally obfuscating the point. It's missing the point on purpose. And it's trying to cover up for the fact that they would have enforcement capabilities. I also liked, and we'll keep watching this clip here in a second, but before it was, you know, put on pause, Nina Jankowicz said something about like, oh, you know, a lot of people have been likening this to the Ministry of Truth from 1984, and well, it's not like the Ministry of Truth because it doesn't have any enforcement capabilities. It's not not yet. I mean, presumably in the world of 1984, those ministries didn't start off with that authoritarian power. It was probably the way the 1984 probably started is probably just like this, where it was this innocuous agency, the agency of good things and unicorns and fluff and nice, everything nice. And, you know, well, we don't have any enforcement capabilities until they do. The CIA, they weren't supposed to have any enforcement capabilities either until they did. Same thing with the NSA and Homeland Security, at least domestically, until they did. Same thing with the ATF and the IRS and the Bureau of Land Management. And then all of a sudden they got SWAT teams. The Bureau of Land Management, what does it need a SWAT team for? Who knows? They didn't start off with those things, but you could imagine you could very easily imagine the trail of logic from this
Might
year.
call it Trail of Tears.
Yes, this year from when the Disinformation Board was founded, all the way up to I don't know, even 5 or 10 years from now, where all of a sudden it gets its own SWAT team too, and it has it's feeding information to the FBI, and then people are kicking in doors. It would just be another intelligence agency that has at its disposal the full power of the police state. That's
Just
how
look
these
at
things go.
Just look what they said that what they're actually doing, though. Their stated goal is to find and research people who are violating laws and restricting people's constitutional rights, which again would be a breach of law.
That wasn't even really their mandate. Their mandate was just to find people, quote unquote, spreading disinformation, which is.
She said it was violating people's right to free speech. So they are violating someone's constitutional rights. Thus, they're looking for people who have, in their mind, broken laws. Well, what's the point of finding people who broke laws or violated constitutional rights unless you plan on prosecuting them through other avenues?
Exactly. Well, and then I'm sure you agree with this. I mean, like, I would fully reject the idea that one civilian could curtail the speech, the First Amendment rights of another civilian.
I don't agree with
using
them.
only. Well, no. Well, let me finish. So, like, the idea that I, as a civilian, could harm somebody else's speech rights merely by speaking. It's already illegal for me to, like, hold you captive in my basement. I mean, I do it anyways, but who's going to enforce that? But just me, like, that's already illegal, and that would, I guess, restrict your First Amendment because you're being held captive. But if I just say something to you, there's nothing I could possibly say to you unless somebody knows some kind of spell or something. Like, there's nothing I could possibly say to you that would restrict your First Amendment rights. There's nothing. So it's either something physical that's already illegal. So what do you need a new board to prosecute things that are already illegal? Just use the police. Or they're looking for a new clever way of prosecuting things that weren't previously illegal, but they are now illegal by redefining it. The idea that you have a board that is looking for people saying things that, quote unquote, reduce or restrict other people's abilities to say things is completely, it's just completely an erroneous thing. Like, it's just not, there's no logical foundation to it.
What it looks like to me is they got a group together of officials, including from law enforcement and intelligence agencies within the DHS, and brought different individuals together to be a part of a group that would coordinate and strategize on how to find crimes for people who have gone against the narrative. Try to find ways to prosecute them and coordinate their efforts to do so. It doesn't matter that they themselves will not be doing the arresting.
Exactly. This would be, I mean, because Nina talked a lot about the schools, the school board issues, and the parents going to school board saying, like, hey, I'd like it if my daughter wasn't being raped in the locker room by trans kids.
Please and thank you.
Yeah, please and thank you. Hey, I don't really like that this teacher is reading a hardcore pornography manga to my third grader. That's a little offensive. Please don't do that. She's already said, and the FBI has stated, that these parents are potential terrorists. The FBI has a code for these people they can label in their database as a terror group, a recognized terror group, if you go to your school board meeting and complain about that stuff. Nina had talked about that. So who do you think that they're going to go after? I mean, there's a lot of different people that they probably were looking at to go after, but one of the top ones would probably would have been these school board parents who were speaking out. And why? There is no constitutional purposes. It's exactly what you had just said, Dyer. It's ways of finding new ways of criminalizing people who go against the narrative. And it is in fact the enforcement mechanism, or would have been the enforcement mechanism for the administration's propaganda. If you went against the propaganda, that's outlawed. If you had your own propaganda, that's outlawed too. There is no truth but what Big Brother says it is. That's it. There is nothing else.
Exactly.
All right, let's finish watching this video here, and then we'll watch our next video.
you were asking me, and they were explicit about what it does and does not do. It was never about censorship, policing speech, or removing content from anywhere. Its function was to keep Homeland Security officials aware of how bad actors, including human smugglers, transnational criminal organization, and foreign adversaries could use disinformation to advance their goals. As Secretary Marcos said, he has asked former DHS Secretary Michael Chernoff and former DAG Jamie Gorelick to lead a thorough review. This is the pause that I was talking about, an assessment as members of the bipartisan Homeland Security Council Advisory Council. The board will not convene during that period, but the departments work across several administrations to address disinformation that threatens the security for our country is critical and will continue. So that work is going to continue.
So if it's pausing because you think the board was mischaracterized, then the disinformation board is being shut down because of disinformation? Is that what's happening here?
Look, I mean, the board was put forth for a purpose, right? To make sure that we really did address what was happening across the country when it came to disinformation.
And it's okay to wait now, 75 days.
It's just it's going to pause. There's been a mischaracterizations from outside forces, and so now what we're going to do is we're going to pause it and we're going to do an assessment. But the work doesn't stop. We're still going to continue the work. The DHS is still going to continue the work.
Yeah, see, that's what I mean, Dyer. They're still charging forward with this regardless. It's just it's now doesn't have a named figurehead. It's going to be more covered up. That they're not going to have as much fanfare with it next time. And it'll probably end up being a classified agency at some point. And they're going to keep doing this. So yeah, it's not actually paused, though it is. I guess there was a blow at it. And it is funny that the disinformation board was taken down because of disinformation, because, well, if that is true, then the disinformation board is working as intended. Its very first act was to eliminate itself.
Yeah, it was the most efficient government agency ever created. It, in its first 21 days, managed to eliminate itself. Perfectly efficient.
Yes. That
so, well, if Karen wasn't sure about whether or not disinformation had destroyed the Disinformation Governance Board, Nina Jankowicz, or Jar of Dicks, was pretty sure about it.
Jamie, I would say that the Disinformation Governance Board was the victim of disinformation. So the difference between dis and misinformation.
All right. Yep. So there you go. From the Mary Poppins herself, the Disinformation Board was in fact taken down by disinformation, which is really pretty incredible because again, Dyer and I feel that the disinformation was about to be propagated by the Disinformation Board. So the fact that it was able to take out itself before it became a threat is rather impressive. Though we know from their perspective, what they mean is that, well, disinformation about Nina, merely looking at her Twitter history and reading blog posts that she wrote.
What she said recently,
yes.
Yeah.
That was disinformation to repost things that she said in context. Okay. So from their perspective, the Disinformation Board was a total failure. I mean, the idea that something that's supposed to prevent disinformation can be taken down by disinformation. I mean, that would be like the military just being founded to take on adversaries and then just totally disbanding itself after losing a single battle.
Yeah. So moving on.
Yes. All right. So it's for the best that the Biden administration and their mainstream media allies are the least qualified at determining what is truth and what is fiction. Last month, Barry McCarthy tweeted video footage of Ukraine. This is the first time. This is not even the first time that so-called journalists have been fooled by game footage. So Barry McCarthy is a former colonel. I believe he's a retired colonel, and he's often, I believe, on MSNBC, providing quote unquote analysis for wartime and foreign policy stuff. And he's sitting there tweeting out hey, look at this crazy stuff happening in Ukraine. And it's footage from a video game. And that's footage from a video game that we saw 2 months ago. And he tweeted it out this week. I mean, come on, guys. Come on. You got to stop tweeting out video game footage. And he was tweeting it out supporting the reason why we needed to send $40 billion to Ukraine. There are Congress people right now who voted to send $40 billion to Ukraine based on watching video game footage that was posted to Twitter. I guarantee you that some of them think that was real still, even though it's been shown to be false like 4 or 5 times at this point. And so you had people voting to send your money there. This is how we make decisions now. The adults are back in charge, I suppose, where you've got a bunch of boomer idiots spending your inheritance, spending what was supposed to be, you were supposed to be their posterity, for which they left a better, more vibrant country. Instead, they sucked it down for everything it was worth, left it as this husk, this dead husk, and now they're taking even more out of it. They're spending your future at this point, spending your ability to even revive the husk of your country. And they're doing it on the basis of memes they saw on Twitter. I mean, that's the state of the country. That's the state of the country. I hope everybody enjoys this. If you do want to feel a little bit of silver lining, it's kind of like a black pill silver lining. You know, every black pill has some silver lining on it. The economy is likely to be in some pretty dire straits for years at this point. I mean, even if we were to fully stop the Biden administration policies now, I mean, it would take 5 years to recover. If Biden is able to finish out his term, which, I mean, somebody at least of similar ideology will, I mean, we really are, people are talking now, we are looking at a full decade of recession and recovery. So
and possibly depression.
There'll be a lot of depression. So the silver lining, though, that I want you guys to take is that boomers who are supposed to be retiring right now are probably going to be at end of life in 10 years. And this is supposed to be their glory years. Well, the economy that they set up to benefit themselves and was running just fine on their behalf for 60 years, it was just a little too corrupt. It ran just a little too hot, and it just didn't quite make it until all the boomers died off. So all these boomers who made all of these terrible economic decisions and destroyed the economy for the last 60 years supposedly on their behalf in a selfish way, spending your future, making sure that you had millennials just completely unable to buy a house, unable to move out of your parents' house, getting all of these nonsense educations. They did all that to you so that they could enrich themselves. And now at the end game, when it matters for them, all of their portfolios are totally destroyed. You're going to have boomers living in squalor, living in ditches, living homeless. You might be there alongside them if you're a millennial, but you have time to recover. So take some solace in that the people that did this to you, they're going to suffer until they die in the next 10 years. But you will eventually recover. You will eventually recover. Everybody who's millennial age right now, this is going to be a bad decade, but you will recover. The boomers, they'll be dead by the time it recovers. So take some solace in that. They did this to you, and they're going to be paying the worst price for it when it matters most to them. You will eventually recover.
There's the silver lining for you.
Yes.
All right, next story is a shorter one, but an important one. James O'Keefe had another sting. What?
I'm black-pilled on boomers.
Yes, you are. So James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, has released another video. This time,
my former employer.
Yes, he has a beautiful young lady who managed to honeypot, a member of Twitter's. What was his job again?
He was a senior engineer, apparently.
Yeah, senior engineer at Twitter. Let's hear what the video has to say.
So do you think there's a difference between Twitter's definition of free speech and Elon's definition of free speech?
Twitter does not believe in free speech. Elon believes in free speech.
What do your colleagues say about it?
They hate it. Some of my colleagues are like super left. Our jobs are at stake. He's a capitalist. If we weren't really operating like capitalist mode, we were very socialist. Like we're all like communist.
Twitter not believe in free speech?
Because Twitter wants to censor bullying and harassment. And the idea of free speech is that you can bully and harass people. And Twitter does not believe in this value as a problem because it's not conducive to a business. If you want to run a business, like even Facebook or Instagram, they don't want people bullying and harassing, like or even YouTube. They straight up any toxic behavior, they're like, nope, we can't have it.
For example, like if you bully a transgender, the right thinks it's okay, the left does not. Ideologically, it does not make sense, like because we're actually censoring the right, not the left. Because everyone on the right wing will be like, bro, it's okay to say, you just gotta tolerate it.
Okay, so two things. First off, he says that Twitter is opposed to bullying, and then because they're opposed to bullying, that they can't allow free speech. Well, first off, everyone's allowed to not allow people to message them. There is already an avenue where people can insulate themselves from criticism, and it doesn't require Twitter to remove people because of their opinions or violate free speech. So that doesn't necessitate bullying. And then, furthermore, Twitter does allow bullying of people on the right. They allow people to say kill all white people or kill all men. They allow violent rhetoric and calls to violence from Black Lives Matter and Antifa. They let literal terrorists have accounts on Twitter, and yet they remove people because they support Trump. So don't give me that shit.
Absolutely. You keep going.
Oh, okay. So also you should probably figure out by now that if you are a member of a left-wing organization and a hot chick hits on you, starts asking you questions,
or
it's probably James O'Keefe.
Or if you're of a different persuasion and a hot, sexy young man comes up against you, he's probably, if he's out of your league, he's probably also Project Veritas, because I don't know if you saw that.
It's James O'Keefe himself.
Yes, I don't know if you saw that, but they got another guy the day after, and it was a gay guy, and they had a guy there too. So James does not discriminate on what your preference is. He will still get you. He'll still get you on camera.
And if you are a 2 and you're being hit on by 8 to 10, maybe think, maybe I ought to just not look extra sexy today in this lighting. Maybe they're trying information from me. I mean, they're asking lots of pointed questions about the politics of the business you work for. Come on, how stupid and desperate do you have to be?
Yeah, you're a guy who looks like that, and some girl is desperately interested in what you do at work. Red flag. Yeah.
You're not that interesting, okay?
Abort. Though, if you would like to date hot women in your area, I would recommend adding to your Tinder profile that you are a Twitter employee, and you will probably get some hits.
Yeah, of very hot ladies that will probably have one date, one lunch with you, and then you'll never see them again.
Yeah. Well, you just have to keep, you could string her along, pretend that you work at Twitter, and then, you could catfish her. Wouldn't that be
or
a thing?
You give lots of really, really spicy details and promise more if the relationship continues.
Exactly.
And then get married and have kids and keep promising more information.
Yeah. So, obviously, Twitter is upset at James O'Keefe. They got another person who is a Twitter employee who said that Elon's opinion doesn't matter because he has Asperger's, and Elon responded to the clip on Twitter with the frowny emoji, like a sad face. Like, I don't know. I mean, a lot of the quote unquote like intelligentsia, like a lot of them who like build these like big platforms have like some kind of spectrum problem where they're supposedly diagnosed with Asperger's. I would think that clearly Zuckerberg does, but Elon is rather high functioning. I mean, I don't know that I would call him autistic so much as just like, I don't know, he's like focused on what he's doing. I don't know, that's what autism is these days, right? It's just like, oh, people are like focused on doing math and science, and like all of a sudden you're autistic, and we wonder why the like average grade and just intelligence of the country has just steeply declined is because we labeled all smart people as a mental disability. Like, you wonder about that. So
yeah. Oof.
As of right now, the latest update on the Twitter Elon news is that Elon has announced that he is pausing purchase, the acquisition of Twitter while they do some investigating. It would appear that Twitter has perhaps fluffed their numbers a little bit on how many users are bots. Twitter claims that less than 5% of its users are bots, which is, actionable information because that is what they tell advertisers. And one of Twitter's only income sources is advertising. And they're selling those ads on the basis that real people are looking at those ads and engaging with those ads. And what the truth is that it seems like there's a lot of bot accounts. And so Twitter claims that less than 5% of the accounts are bots. Most people find that laughable. And Elon did his own private audit of his user base to see how many of his were bots. And he came up with a very different number than 5%. Some are suggesting as high as 20%. Others are suggesting as high as 50%, which is maybe believable.
He checked 100 accounts, right? And then people got on him for only checking 100 accounts. Like, well, that's what Twitter does.
Yeah, so so that's what Elon did when he announced that he saw a much higher percentage than 5% of bots. And people asked what his methodology was. He said he sampled 100 random accounts. People responded saying, well, 100's not enough for a random sample. And Elon says, I don't disagree with you, but that's what Twitter told me is their method, is they sample 100 accounts. And if if those accounts are good to go, then that's good.
So if you don't buy his calculations, then you shouldn't buy Twitter's either, and probably should be demanding answers.
Yeah, so this may also be related to Twitter's kind of purge and sudden acquisition of new users and purge of leftist users. We brought this story to you 2 weeks ago. But it seemed that after Elon announced that he was going to be purchasing Twitter, the day after, it would seem that conservatives seem to be gaining hundreds of thousands of followers. Like Steven Crowder gained almost 200,000 followers. Marjorie Taylor Greene gained 100,000 followers overnight. I mean, this follower gain is, Xing their account by 20% increase in followers over the course of a day and a night. I mean, absurd follower growth. And then you had a lot of leftist accounts or people who are traditionally left-wing losing tens to hundreds of thousands of followers. I think Rachel Maddow on that same night lost 70,000 followers.
I'm not surprised anyone follows her.
Well, clearly they don't. And so the thought is that there's a lot of explanations from Twitter why these mysterious numbers changed. But the current conspiracy theory, which is probably more true than not, is that the bot accounts aren't necessarily bot accounts from a Russian marketing agency or something like that, but maybe Twitter's launching their own bots. And so my thought on it is that maybe Twitter's algorithm really is a good, true, neutral algorithm, but what Twitter's doing is feeding that good algorithm false information. It's creating bot accounts to follow leftists, and then it's banning right-wing accounts. And so the good algorithm, the neutral algorithm, just sees, leftist accounts get more traction, right accounts don't get as much traction, so I'm going to just promote what gets traction. Whereas if they weren't putting their thumb on the scale, the algorithm would put out more right-wing content because that's what people like and that's what people engage with. And so that's what my theory on it is. There's a lot of other competing theories, but Twitter doing this, removing what are probably bot accounts from leftist accounts and then re-enabling what are probably real accounts to right-wing accounts, that's going to shift the numbers favorably towards that 5% bot number. So what Elon needs to do, and he's actually called for an SEC investigation, a Security and Exchange Commission investigation into whether or not Twitter was lying to their investors, that's some pretty big guns when you got the SEC involved to come investigate whether or not you've been doing what is essentially will amount to stock fraud, that they will be doing trading fraud. I mean, this is what Enron went down for, is they were lying to investors about what their books were and about the value of their assets. Twitter may well have been doing the same. And so if that is what comes to light, I don't know what's going to happen, but heads are going to roll. Heads are going to absolutely roll.
I've heard plenty of times that commentators had already suggested that it was a possibility that they were lying about their actual user base. But it was nothing. No one was going to do anything about it because how would you be able to figure it out? I'm wondering if it was already part of Elon's plan to do this. He might still want to purchase Twitter, right? But even if he didn't, end up doing it, that he'd be able to expose Twitter through the process.
All of this started because Twitter banned the Babylon Bee for making a joke about that. Who's that health general, the Surgeon General? Who's a man that thinks he's a woman, and also killed a bunch of old people in Pennsylvania. People forget about that. Do you remember that?
I remember that.
Yeah. He killed a bunch of old people in Pennsylvania during COVID. When COVID started, like a lot of other states did, he was the health secretary for the state of Pennsylvania, and he authorized the moving of COVID patients into nursing homes, where the nursing homes that weren't infected, and introducing COVID patients to those nursing homes. And he also took his mother out of a nursing home before he made that decision. He probably, not nearly as many as New York and not quite as many as Pennsylvania, not quite as many as Michigan, but probably third on the list would have been Pennsylvania for the number of old people killed in nursing homes due to their COVID policy. And he orchestrated that. And for his, I guess, for his service, he was tapped by the Biden administration to run health for the entire country.
It's severe enough that if the Republicans get control, he might be facing criminal charges for what he did.
Oh, I mean, he absolutely should be. But either way, he was named like Woman of the Year, even though he's a man, by some magazine. I can't remember which one it was. And so the Babylon Bee, they put out a joke tweet that, Babylon Bee, as a media agency, they also selected a Man of the Year, and they selected him as the Man of the Year. And
so Twitter he's both Man and Woman of the Year.
Yeah, so Twitter banned Babylon Bee for that. And then Elon was unhappy about that, probably because he was just looking for a laugh that day and scrolled through his feed and said, wonder where the Babylon Bee went to. And then, because he's the richest man in the world, just decided on a whim that, well, if Babylon Bee can't be on Twitter, then I suppose I'll just have to buy it. So if Twitter had just not banned the Babylon Bee, they would not be in this whole mess, which is kind of funny.
Yep. So next story, we have baby formula.
What baby formula?
Exactly, that's the problem.
So empty or sparsely filled shelves with higher prices has become commonplace in most American supermarkets. I've also noticed that vending machines are suspiciously empty and shallow. Have you noticed that?
I've noticed that, yes.
Yeah, I've noticed that quite a bit. Normally, you ever walk past, walk through your work break room, or just find a place that's got vending machines, and just anywhere that's got an open window to it, not those opaque ones, but just take a look at it and see if you notice, like, oh wow, there's like 7 rows of the same thing, and so there'll be like a drop in variety, or what is there is very shallowly stocked, or there's a lot of missing spots.
Thanks, Obama.
Yeah, thanks, Obama. I've definitely noticed that. So this shortage thing's like kind of all over the place, and it's going to pop up in weird places first. I had pointed out last year that I had noticed at gas stations, if you went to the drink refrigerators, there was, again, very shallowly stocked drinks, mostly with anything that was related to Coke, any Coke products. They'd be very shallowly stocked. There wouldn't be as many flavors. So I like Monsters. There's a ton of flavors of Monsters. I know you like Bangs, tons of flavors of those. And you go and look for them, and there's some there, but there's not the like 50 flavors that you used to have, or right. They'll have 5 rows of the same flavor, and so you're starting to see this stuff kind of all over the place. We've been seeing it for a while, and we were told, well, this is just COVID shaking.
It's transitory.
Yeah, right? Transitory. And it's it's not transitory, and it has now transitioned into baby formula. So, on top of higher prices and shallowly stocked shelves and lower selection, in recent weeks, the national supply of baby formula is down 45%. What?
Yeah, as of today, 45%.
Wow. Man, Roe v. Wade really kicked. No, Roe v. Wade did not kick in yet to boost the baby population. But if it had just waited like 5 months, that would have been like a funny thing. Is like, oh wow, like Roe v. Wade must have just like increased the baby population by 45%. But that's not what happened. This happened before. So yeah, without Roe v. Wade being knocked down, the baby population is still the same.
God
somehow
forbid we have to start feeding the babies we're having. Gosh darn it.
yeah.
Can't kill them anymore.
So what? So the cause of the 45% down. I mean, that must be because people are feeding their babies 45% more formula, right?
That's got to be it.
That's got to be it. Okay. So any parents who buy baby formula, for many mothers who don't breastfeed for many reasons, or fathers who breastfeed, like the like the transportation secretary. This is a problem, and again, there's numerous reasons why in a modern age that a woman may not be able to breastfeed her baby, or may choose not to. So Dieter's going to read through those.
Yeah. So just a couple
and
quick ones.
He did vet this by a woman that is very close to him that does knows these things, right?
Yes. Occasionally I speak to her.
Yes.
So
that would be his wife.
Oh,
wait. Did you misinterpret when I told you to get this vetted by okay.
Yes.
Damn it.
This is awkward. Anyways, the homeless lady down the street said that some women can't breastfeed, just can't. And other women, they see breastfeeding as a chore or somewhat out of vogue. It's a kind of a cultural thing now that some women are not even attempting to start breastfeeding. And if you don't try right away, you can't. Also, many children have allergies, and certain formulas they can't either can't breastfeed, and sometimes they're picky about what kind of formula they can have. So it's not only the formula supply is restricted, but also even the formula, if you have formula, it might not be a formula that they can have, right? And also, mothers sometimes are not sufficiently healthy to breastfeed. So if you had a rough pregnancy or you're already unhealthy, you might not be able to breastfeed because of the mother's health.
Yeah, I know that there was some jokes put out there, flippantly, whether they were funny or not. I thought they were funny. Whereas, baby formula shortage, why don't you just breastfeed? So one of the, glories of modern technology in the West is that far more pregnancies are viable. Now, there'll be these fake statistics that the leftists will give that, like, U.S. has a higher birth mortality rate than, like, Cuba or something like that. But that's because Cuba doesn't register dead babies as having been born. They just say they don't get included in the statistics. But the truth of the matter is that far more pregnancies are carried all the way to term and delivered as healthy babies now because of modern medical technology as compared to previous generations. And so while previous generations of mothers might, if you weren't healthy while you were pregnant, maybe the baby didn't survive, and maybe if the baby had survived, you probably wouldn't have been able to breastfeed. We also had a large population of wet nurses, which are mothers or women who were not the mother of the baby but are still able to breastfeed, and the baby would breastfeed off of them. So there was solutions to this, and there was also, again, that range of health which you can now have and have a healthy baby is much wider. And so maybe you're healthy enough with modern medical technology to bring a baby to term, but you're not healthy enough to make good breast milk. Or, again, if you were in the past, you would have had a wet nurse, which is not very popular any longer. Again, the solutions that we had in the past, those kinds of, I guess, built-in safety measures or check valves, they don't really exist anymore. And it didn't really matter because we had a modern baby formula industry that would support that. But we don't anymore, apparently.
Thankfully, because we have formula, we have a backup. So babies whose mothers don't produce enough milk, don't produce good enough of milk, or can't produce milk at all, don't have to die because we have formula that can allow them to have what they need to both be to survive, but also be healthy and healthy enough to grow up to to develop their brains properly, so they don't grow up with development issues. And
they don't
even become furries. So at 83.2% of American babies start off with breastfeeding, but only about half of them continue to breastfeed till 6 months. And why that's important is that babies at 6 months old still require a mostly liquid food diet, most likely only liquid food diet, depending on how quickly they're developing.
When Dyer was 6 months old, he was eating steaks, rare.
Exactly. So because of that, the stat is really that half of babies in America are dependent in their first year on baby formula. That's an important stat.
Yes. And of course, just because of the modern lifestyle, there's people travel and all kinds of people are going to work. We've got 2-parent incomes now. So, sometimes you just have to supplement. But whatever the reasoning, it doesn't really matter. The free market decided that baby formula was an industry that needed to happen. The people grew accustomed to it, and it's that reinforcement of the consumer and the producer creating a product and an industry around something.
Feedback loop.
Yes, and then we became reliant on it as a culture. I don't necessarily think that's a problem. I think it's just a industrialization of the food supply is the only reason why we are able to live at this standard of living, though the Democrats are trying hard to reverse that, and support this much population in the country and on the planet. So I don't see this as an issue inherently, but the destruction of the supply chain certainly is causing some problems here. So the baby formula shortage, while some are lying about it, is not due to COVID-19. It was funny. There's some people who were saying, well, first off, the baby formula shortage is not true. It's Russian propaganda. And then the next week they're saying, well, it is true, but it was COVID-19's fault. And then this week they were saying, Joe Biden fixed it, even though he didn't. So it wasn't caused by COVID-19 supply chain disruptions, and it's definitely not been caused by the Russian-Ukraine war. And I'm not being sarcastic about that. It really has nothing to do with it. The baby formula shortage was, however, completely caused by the Biden administration, without a doubt.
Yes. So the FDA knew back in October that they were going to be shutting down, or at least investigating and likely shutting down, the factory for Abbott Nutrition plant, their factory in Sturgis, Michigan. For one, and that company is one of the only 4 baby formula companies in the U.S. So shutting down a major factory of one of the only 4 companies in the U.S. that makes this product obviously will have a huge supply chain effect, far more than COVID or anything else that's happened recently could have caused. The FBI failed to
FDA.
Sorry, FDA. What did I say?
FBI.
Sorry, the FDA failed to promptly investigate a whistleblower complaint sent in October that accused the company of numerous safety violations at the plant. The safety violations include falsifying records, failing to properly test baby formula, and before releasing it. So also 4 children were infected by bacterial infections from the formula produced at this factory, possibly. That's the accusation. Regardless, they had information enough that they knew they're going to be shutting down the factory to investigate it back in October, and they made 0 plans.
Yeah. So I deal in food a lot. It's my company, and so we end up having to take responsibility when one of our products is linked to somebody who got a foodborne illness. But that's just a formality and a legality that we have to take responsibility for. But what we find often enough is that a proper investigation will pin the infection of the food product to some other step in the supply chain. So we'll send food to a restaurant, and then maybe at the restaurant they didn't sanitize their knives correctly, and then all of a sudden it's our food product, but the disease came from the knife at the restaurant, and then all of a sudden the person gets sick, and then now we got to pay the bill for it.
And Fox, tell me, how hard is it to find the chain of custody and hunt down the source of an infection if you wait multiple months?
One of the things I specialize in is writing a traceability algorithm for my company, and it's essentially all just like black magic and puffy fluffery. It's not really real. So you can't. You literally cannot do a high detail trace back of a product at every step along the supply chain. The best you can do is just decide that certain companies in the supply chain are at fault regardless. And so that's what would have happened to Abbott, is that if anybody got sick, so what probably would have happened is, my company sells to, we're B2B, so we sell to restaurants, and then the restaurant prepares it and feeds it to you. Baby formula is B2C, business to consumer. So Abbott would be selling it directly to parents, but they're selling you not individually packaged servings of baby formula. They're selling you a canister of powder that you then are, dipping your grubby hands into and getting a scoop out and then pouring it into, did you wash the bottle or not? And then you shake it up and you put it in the water. And maybe when you're filling it up from the tap, maybe you bump the edge of the tap spout against the lip of the bottle. There's any number of places where a parent could accidentally contaminate their baby formula at any step along the way.
Are you calling parents terrorists? Sorry.
No, I'm just saying that things happen, right? And it happens. Some parents are less careful than others. Like for me, I have a very low tolerance for something that's been left out for even a few minutes because I'm a germphobe. Some parents maybe have less of a tolerance, or maybe they have more tolerance for that. Maybe they don't care that the pizza's been setting out all night and they'll just eat it. And maybe they transpose that onto their children and treat their children the same way. So we don't know if the baby formula that infected and unfortunately killed some of these babies, maybe it was left out for the evening and then they gave it to them the next morning saying, I don't care. Or maybe they grabbed one that they used yesterday and it had just a little bit of extra baby formula in it after the baby drank. And they're like, well, I don't really have time to wash it, so we're just going to fill it back up.
God, gross. That stuff molds so quickly.
But people do that. And so like I said earlier, it's really hard to decide what happened. Once that baby formula goes into your house or once one of my products goes into a restaurant, I can't really, I don't have cameras in there. I can't tell what was happening to it. And so somebody in the supply chain is always the final person who's got to take responsibility for it. And so Abbott, they were forced to take responsibility for it, even though the particular foodborne illness that the babies died of, swab testing at the Abbott labs was unable to find that particular strain anywhere in the building. And so it doesn't really matter. And I've had this happen with my company before too, where somebody will get sick from something and then they're like, okay, they got sick from this specific illness. It's like, okay, so we swab test my facility and we don't find that one, but we still have to take responsibility for it. That's what happened to Abbott, is that somebody got sick from something, that same something, they couldn't find it in Abbott Labs and they still got pegged with it. That's just how the food industry runs. I don't know that there's a better way to run it, but I'm just telling you that's just how it runs. It's not necessarily my analysis whether or not it's good or bad. It's just that's how it works for me. I assume that's how it's working for Abbott. And because of the way that baby formula is regulated, why would there only be 4 companies? This is, how many babies did you say need formula at some point? That seems like a pretty big industry. I mean, it's every human born, 80% of all humans born in America need baby formula at some point. I would say that's a pretty good industry. Why is there only 4 companies?
It was 50%.
Yeah. Well, so why is there only 4 companies managing that? Well, because it's heavily regulated. If it was a little bit less regulated, and the question with regulation is always, is the regulation helpful in preventing what you're trying to keep people safe from, or is the regulation merely a mechanism from keeping smaller players out of the field? And that would appear to be what a lot of the food and a lot of the baby formula regulations end up doing, is that they're not necessarily designed to protect the consumer. They're designed to keep smaller players from picking up market share and diversifying the supply chain. If the supply chain was a little bit more diversified, it wouldn't really be as big of a deal that one plant got taken down. It is a big deal because the baby formula supply chain is not diversified. We also in America outlawed the importation of baby formula from places like Europe, which has high, strict standards, which would be perfectly fine for babies in America to have. Maybe we don't want to be importing it from Sudan. But, from Europe would be fine, but we're not allowed to do that because of regulations. And one of the things that Joe did was allow us to import from Europe, and I guess that's a big deal or whatever, but I'm sure we'll talk about that here in a minute.
Yep.
Where are we at?
Where you're at.
All right, so the FDA said that it shut down the factory in February with no plan to make up for the lost production, because the FDA doesn't care about production. They care about, shutting things down.
Well, the plan would be to investigate right away and get them back opened up again.
Yes. So nor did the FDA start working on a stopgap solution for restoring the factory or making up for its lost supply by other means. The Biden administration ignored repeated warnings about the situation. One possible reason for the slow reaction was that Biden waited until mid-February of this year to appoint someone at the FDA, appoint someone to lead the FDA. So it was just kind of, a boat without a rudder there. It was just kind of running rogue, closing down stuff, but not having anybody leading the agency. It's just all these agents running around saying, I don't know, we don't have anyone leading us. What do we do? I don't know. Just do what we normally do. Shut stuff down. Okay. We got to look like we're doing something. Busy work. Congress confirmed Joe Biden's pick to lead the FDA without any issues. For no apparent reason, Joe Biden left no one at the helm of the agency. In March, the Food and Drug Administration released a warning to consumers, urging them to be aware of certain products branded Similac, Almetunium, Animantium, and Eloncare. Elcare. I don't know how to read baby formula names.
Oh my God.
I would never feed a baby something called Similac. Jesus Christ.
That's a major brand.
It's going to turn him into a Borg or something. Like simulating lactate. Why would you name your product that? Jesus Christ. Where the name came from. Why you name it like Happy Baby or something like that?
Right. So the point was
delicious yum stuff.
The FDA investigated extremely slowly, which prevented the factory from getting put back up and running again, and just slow rolled it because apparently they had no direction. The Biden admin was being sent warnings by people within the company and other officials in government were saying, hey, the FDA needs to do something. It needs to finish its inspection and it needs to let the factory open back up again because the supply problem is getting worse every day. They're not producing formula, and that happened. They knew it was going to happen in October. They didn't do anything to prepare for it. They shut the place down in February and didn't even think about reopening it or finishing or dealing with the problem until the problem blew up in their face in the media. So,
well, I mean, it's not like babies are people, Dyer. I mean,
right? They're just clumps of cells, yes. Right?
Very hungry clumps
Biden
of
just
cells.
doesn't want them.
Exactly.
So Biden's solution, now that the problem has been, and by Biden I mean whoever's running Biden right now, their solution was
the White House.
Yeah, the White House. White House is
the Easter Bunny. The Easter Bunny is running Joe Biden.
So the Easter Bunny's solution was that the Biden admin arranged for the Air Force to fly 35 tons of baby formula from Germany. They are mostly 8-ounce bottles meant for newborns that are slated to be delivered to hospitals because hospitals provide a few bottles of newborn, tiny little bottles, 8 ounces, to babies that are born at the hospital. That will not really help out anyone who has no formula in the stores because that's not where the formula is going to. So, second, Joe Biden has invoked the Defense Production Act. Jan Psaki, before she left, the dearly departed, said that they intended to use the act to organize cargo routes, non-traditional cargo routes, to boost supplies to the remaining factories. They also said that they would increase formula imports. As you saw, they were bringing in some from Germany, but they're going to allow companies to purchase formula from other countries. None of these things, however, required that the Biden admin do the Defense Production Act. None of them did.
Yeah, I mean, essentially all he did was deregulate, as I mentioned earlier, the import of baby formula from Europe. All they did was deregulate that. You don't really... So, like, what was the use of the Defense Production Act was to, I guess, blast through the red tape set up by the executive. So the executive declared an emergency, that their regulations were so onerous that they needed to declare an emergency and War Powers Act to get through their own regulation. If they merely deregulated it, then stores here could start purchasing and ordering baby formula from Europe. If they merely just deregulated it. And it's not a law by Congress, it's a regulation by the FDA that's preventing this. The FDA could just deregulate it. Like they don't need an act of Congress, they just need an act of the FDA, and they could deregulate it even temporarily. They could have a sunset period on it, but then that would allow stores to start importing from even Canada and Europe. and I think everybody would be fine with that. I don't necessarily know that, families with babies and infants, I don't know that they necessarily want to. I don't know they're going to be comforted by going to the hospital to get free formula and waiting in line for that, as they would be just going to the store and buying their favorite brand. As Dyer said earlier, some babies, a lot of babies, have allergies to certain things, and there's formulas designed around those allergies. So if you have a baby with one of those allergies, generalized infant formula is not going to do it. You got to have your formula. You got to have your favorite formula. And so this does not help. And it is merely a way of the government causing a problem and then using more government to solve the problem, rather than just saying, oh, you know what caused this problem was regulation. Maybe we should deregulate it a little bit. Again, not deregulate it where you can just feed babies sand, but like, or protein powder, but you could just deregulate it a little bit. Just say, well, Europe and the EU have strict standard on their baby formula. Anything that passes the EU standard, we can import. And the FDA should have been evaluating the EU standard years ago. There was really no reason to say, okay, well, maybe they could, but they just don't have the time right now to evaluate whether or not the EU standards are up to snuff. Well, maybe they should have thought about that a couple of years ago so that they could have this pull in case of emergency lifeline if we needed it. This was entirely caused by government overregulation. Again, the lack of diversity in the supply chain here in the country, and then the inability to import from abroad. We can import everything else. We can import your cars, outsource your jobs, but for some reason, baby formula is locked down. And you don't have a job, but you can go work at a baby formula factory.
This makes a great distinction between how Trump dealt with a national disaster and how Biden did, because they demanded that Trump use the Defense Production Act to respond to COVID to make sure that more PPE was produced. But Trump didn't need to. He just went to the companies and said, hey, can you do this? And he negotiated with them, and companies on their own, without being forced by government, started to move on production to the things that were needed. And he just was a good negotiator. He was a good leader, and he didn't need to abuse his federal powers or take on powers he didn't believe he really deserved. And when he was asked about Defense Production Act, he said, I don't believe that this scenario justifies the use of the Defense Production Act, even though it could have been used for it. And I'm glad he didn't use it. Now, Biden, he has no need of the Defense Production Act. However, he has invoked it simply so he can have the headline saying that he did something.
And the Defense Production Act is for war. It's for war. What
is the war on baby formula?
Yeah,
buddy.
what on earth authorizes him to initiate this merely for economic problems? I mean, I guess you got to have something, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just like mistaken because of the name of it, but I don't think that you can just use the Defense Production Act
to cover up a mistake he made in his administration.
Exactly. And so that's always what this is used for. Again, this is a government created crisis, a government mismanaged situation that became a crisis. It is not, I don't know if they're attempting to link this to Ukraine or not, but it is not. This has nothing to do with any kind of wartime problem. This is merely just economic mismanagement to the point that babies are going hungry now. I do find it strange whenever I see the news reports and like the local stories on like, oh, this baby's in the hospital because it was starving to death, and I just like, I don't know, you guys. Yeah, this like NBC4 or whatever could find this family. NBC4 couldn't just buy it like a $5 formula.
Yeah.
And none of that stuff makes you wonder, but the baby formula shortage is real. If you are having problems, no one envies you. This is obviously very much exacerbated by the gas prices. You get stories about parents having to drive city to city looking for, again, their preferred brand, and gas being $4.50 average, $5, $6, $7 in some places, especially the bigger cities. You're burning tens of dollars of gas just looking for baby formula. That's not going to do anybody any favors, financially, and it's certainly not going to do the Democrats any favors come midterms. again, the American people are very resilient to those academic issues of, whether or not the deficit's high, whether or not Jeff Bezos is paying his fair share. If their babies are hungry, man, you're not gonna be able to cover that up or spin your way out of that one. I don't know that people with hungry babies really care that Biden is saying this is the fault of the government or this is the fault of the Republicans. I think that they're just seeing that Joe's in charge and their babies are hungry, and now I don't know that they're going to make any more calculation than that, and they really shouldn't.
Yep. So the head of the FDA, who is now facing charges of dereliction of his duties, his office has announced that the FDA is working with the shuttered factory to get it up and running by next week. It's funny how quickly they were able to get it up and running once it became their problem, right? I do think it's a little funny that the guy was put into office in February, mid-February, at the same time as they're shutting down the factory, and then it suddenly became his problem.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if there was a diaper shortage, maybe Joe Biden would care a little bit more.
Maybe, because he definitely depends.
Alrighty, you ready for the next story?
Yep.
Alrighty, so Title IX has widely been used to prevent workplace discrimination and I guess like laws at the local level from discriminating against people. It is now being used against children who don't use other children's preferred pronouns. A mother in Wisconsin, A mother in Wisconsin was informed by her 13-year-old son, Brandon, that his school had a Title IX complaint filed against him, accusing him of sexual harassment for refusing to use a non-binary student's preferred they/them pronouns. Her son was one of 3 8th graders from the same class accused in the Title IX probe. Title IX is being used to probe 13-year-olds now. It's gross.
That is not okay. So the complaint was made after the 3 students refused to refer to one of their classmates by their preferred pronouns instead of referring to them as she, her. That's what they called she, her as. The school referred to their refusal as a sexual harassment and also as bullying. Brandon, the one boy identified in the investigation so far, self-identified, has spoken out to defend his friends, and one of his friends was being berated in class for refusing to use the incorrect pronouns, and he defended his friend by saying that he doesn't have to use proper pronouns. It's his constitutional right to not use them. You can't make him say anything.
That is absolutely true. Yeah, this will always become required speech. In college, one of my workmates at the place that I worked at in college was supposedly transgender, and I didn't really care. And I would, he came in the office one day, and I was like, "Hey, what's up, bro?" Or just trying to be friendly. And I didn't even think about it. I wasn't trying to be mean. I would say that to one of the girls that walked in. And he got really upset about it, and then our boss talked to me about it, and I was like, okay, my solution to that is just I will not talk to him. If I'm not going to use his preferred pronouns, I was, but if I'm just going to be friendly with him and he's going to call me out on that little thing, it wasn't even a slip up, it was just a friendly thing, and I was like, okay, well then I'm not going to try to be friendly with him. I'm just not going to talk to him, and I'm not going to use his preferred pronouns when I'm talking with him out there with him not in the room. But this is obviously a situation where they are now compelling speech, and I was allowed to just not speak. That was 10 years ago. But it's not enough to just silence is violence now. So the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, that's cute, is now taking on the case and defending the students, although it is urging for the case to be dismissed because it's obviously not something that really needs to go through the legal system. It's a miscarriage of justice that it was even brought in the first place. It really is just pissing on what Title IX was supposed to be. The school leadership needs to be fired, and the students involved are owed considerable damages. The misuse of pronouns is not part of the school's district's policy or part of Title IX. That makes this investigation not supported by law. It makes it a frivolous lawsuit that will disrupt their education and was merely meant to push a political narrative.
Punitive, you might even say.
Punitive.
Intended to cause harm to punish them. And those
It's
might be some of
authoritarian.
yes, and for that reason, they likely will be owed damages. So, according to witnesses, the complaining student had teased those three boys as much, if not more, than they teased her, including calling them numerous names and yelling them, and for not using the they/them pronouns, even when they were not talking to or about her. The complaint was based on the
Sounds like a bitch.
Yeah, sounds like a bitch, and someone that would it would be normal to be mean back to someone who's being mean to you.
So this is an obvious case of the cry bully, right? So this person is obviously a mean kid, feels entitled, decides, oh, look, if I do this, if I declare myself this thing, I get special privileges, and I can wield it against people frivolously, and that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, they're like, oh, what's her name? And she's like, how dare you call me her? You're horrible people. You're transphobic. And they're like, all right, you're a cunt then. So the complaint was based on a statement from a single music teacher. If the alleged victim student had been teased, then such behavior needs to be addressed by the school staff and administrators, how you would normally deal with any kind of normal bullying or altercation, which a lot of them result in nothing if no one is harmed. But none of this warrants an accusation of sexual harassment and the serious reputational harm that is caused by that.
Absolutely. Alrighty. Our next story, which is definitely sexual harassment, is gas prices, because they're fucking me.
Yes, definitely.
All right. For all the naysayers that claim that the Democrats have no plans to tackle high energy costs, boy, are you embarrassed now, with the nation staring down the nozzle of $4.50 a gallon gas, and now $6+ gas by the end of summer being projected. The Democrats on Thursday unveiled their final solution for the energy crisis. Their plan is simple yet elegant. Make high gas prices illegal.
That's fucking brilliant. Let's just make all things we don't like, I don't know, prices in general. Let's make everything free.
Exactly.
Make profit illegal. So the Consumer Fuel Price Gouging Prevention Act, or the CFPGPA, or CFPGP, makes it illegal to sell gas at a price that, quote, what?
You're not allowed to sell gas at a price that is, quote, unconscionably
excessive.
Yeah, that word does not, it doesn't read phonetically, but it is spelled correctly.
It's a C. The C is what really throws it off.
Yeah, it is a little bit weird.
So yeah, it makes it illegal to sell gas at prices that are, quote, unconscionably expensive and exploitive of an energy emergency. You know what? That seems like a very amorphous term. How do you define, quantify?
Well, that's a great question, because that's the next thing I'm about to read here is, what is an energy emergency? Well, the bill grants the power to the president to decide. Quote, this is a direct quote from the bill. The president may issue an energy emergency proclamation for any area within the jurisdiction of the United States.
Oh, thank God. They said only in cases of emergency. An emergency power is granted to the president has never been abused ever. They just gave him
talking about, Dyer?
power.
What are you talking about? The energy emergency powers have always been abused by the president. Why would you say something like that?
Shit. I don't know why. Maybe because someone wrote it down.
You're vastly mistaken. That's disinformation.
Okay, so they just gave him, whoever the president is at the time, unmeasured power to determine anything is emergency at any time, and then put price controls in.
Exactly. So again, the exact language from the bill, that the bill is, they put it in on Thursday this week. It's HR 7688. It's a very short bill. You can go read it yourself. It's not very long. In the meat section of it, a lot of it's kind of like filler boilerplate stuff and kind of describing what it means. The first 5 paragraphs are the meat of the bill. The rest of it's kind of irrelevant. But the meat of the bill, these are direct quotes. It is illegal to sell gas at a price that is, quote, unconscionably excessive. That's the limit. There's not a number or a percentage or anything like that. It just says unconscionably excessive, which means that the government would then, I guess, ostensibly make some kind of moral judgment about the price of gasoline. I mean, that's what conscionable would mean. It's something that's, a moral imperative on your conscience. So I guess, I don't know. I guess maybe certain gas prices are immoral, as legislated by law. But normally you would want to put some kind of formula on that. And then also, again, energy emergency. The government is allowed to, the president is allowed to issue an energy emergency proclamation in any area within the jurisdiction of the United States. And if you think that we're missing context here, not really. The bill, H.R. 7688, if you want to read it for yourself, it's not very long, and the sections that matter are pretty short. It's clear that the language is deliberately vague and open-ended to allow for anything to be considered an emergency. And the current emergency, for instance, was caused by Biden administration policies. But because it would be too awkward for Joe to declare that his own policies are an emergency, his lackeys are doing everything they can to shift the blame to someone else.
And I'm sure you've seen the reporting this morning that now AAA is projecting that gas prices will hit a national average of $6 a gallon by the month of August. Is this acceptable to you?
No, it is not. And you can thank the activity of Vladimir Putin for invading Ukraine and pulling essentially those bills.
With all due respect, Madam Secretary, that's utter nonsense. In January of 2021, the average gas price in my state was $2.07. 8 months later, long before Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, that price was up over 30%, and it has been going up consistently since. What are you doing to reverse this administration's policies that are drawing down our own supply of energy in this country, that are throttling oil and gas production in the United States of America? What are you doing about it?
With respect, sir, it is not administration policies that have affected supply and demand.
How can you say that when the price of gas was up over 30% from January to... you answer my questions, and it's my time, Madam Secretary, so why don't you answer my question? From January to August, the price of gasoline was up over 30%. In my state alone, it has been a continuous upward tick since then. And here's what your president did when he first came to office. He immediately re-entered the Paris Climate Accord. He canceled the Keystone Pipeline. He halted leasing programs in ANWR. He issued a 60-day halt on all new oil and gas leases and drilling permits on federal lands and waters. That's nationwide. That accounts, by the way, for 25% of U.S. oil production. He directed federal agencies to eliminate all supports for fossil fuels. He imposed new regulations on oil and gas and methane emissions. Those were all just in the first few days. Are you telling me that's had no effect on our energy supply?
94% of the oil and gas executives that were surveyed by the Dallas Fed said that administration policies had nothing to do with the increase in the price of oil.
I'm not interested in opinions of these people. I'm interested in the facts. Are you telling me that these policies had no effect? Is that your testimony that these policies had no effect? Are you telling me, Madam Secretary, are you telling me under oath that these policies had no effect?
Boom.
So
Slade.
think about it this way. There's all the things he listed. Plus, there's the fact that he now has made it so that the president at any moment could take over the ability for the gas company to determine what is an economic price for them to sell their product at, basically making it so they might have to sell their product at a loss or for no profit or not enough profit to operate their business. With that threat hanging over them, why would oil companies invest in expanding production? Why would they create more risk by building new facilities or new pumps when they're not sure if the investments they're making now they can pay off later because they have no control over their business? That their permits might get pulled, that they might have their prices artificially drop lower than they can economically stand.
Oh, and the teeth of the bill is fines and arrests too, by the way. So you could be arrested for selling gas too high.
So even if this is never used, the chilling effect of making it law or making it policy is going to have an economic effect. One reason why oil production isn't increasing is because not only are they not having the land leases to do so, but oil companies are worried about investing millions and millions of dollars into new oil production that they might not get a return on. So do we really know, or do we really want to give these people more emergency powers? What have they done with the powers they have now? Price controls are also perfectly textbook Marxism stuff, and the effects this bill would have are also perfectly predictable. Shortages.
Exactly. This will lead to actual shortages. So we are already seeing sporadic stories in one place or another of being out of gas. But those are usually just one-offs, and it's national news because it's so shocking, but it's, one or two a week, and it's usually that they're out for a day. So let's see here. But the chances are that you have not personally been to a gas station that was out of gas yet. And that's because the prices are high. Yes, the supply is generally lower than it was this time last year or even the year before. But the higher prices make sure that everyone is getting a chance to buy. That's how supply and demand works. This is because you, like everyone else, have probably been attempting to optimize your travels a bit with the higher gas prices. You've probably skipped a trip or delayed errands or thought twice about driving downtown just for fun when you could walk there. It's not life-changing yet, but surely everyone listening right now has been cutting miles out where you can. So you're still paying a higher price per gallon, but you are using less gas than you were probably last year at this time. And there is gas at that higher price when you need it for things that are necessities like driving to work. Your part, Tyre.
See, the alternative is price controls. Artificially make it illegal for gas to be over $4 a gallon. And you will see people filling up more often. The supply has not increased, but now the demand has. And all of a sudden, the tanks run dry. And the dry tanks make people on other places panic buy, and then their tanks run dry too.
Yep, that's what happens with price controls, is just completely out of stuff. Both options really kind of suck, whether or not you want to drive less and pay more or have nothing to buy but not pay as much. Those are both pretty bad options. And don't get me wrong, I don't think we should have to choose between those options. Drill, baby, drill. But it doesn't seem like that's going to be the option that we take for quite a few years. So in the meantime, which would you rather have? $4 a gallon gas that you can't buy, or $6 a gallon gas that you can buy in moderation? You choose. Up to you, Western man. Which way do you choose?
And the way to address the problem would be to increase production and to reduce regulation. And that is the only way you're going to get lower prices.
Yes.
And
at this point, increased supply is the only thing that will decrease prices. That's the only thing.
Correct.
All right.
And so everything else Biden does is wrong.
Definitely correct. All righty. Well, our next story didn't get a picture. I think that's my fault. Let's see here. Bush has talked about the problem with, with all the excitement. But Bush made a statement this week. So with all of the excitement going on around the world, former President George W. Bush stepped out this week to comment on current events. At least that's what we think he was trying to do. Let's watch.
In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq. Anyway, 75.
All right. Well, whoopsies. Those Freudian slips.
Describing America or Russia?
I think he's describing his presidency. Those Freudian slips are pretty brutal. And I will say at the time, and probably anybody who was old enough at the time probably was in favor of us invading Iraq. And that was when we still had not necessarily correctly placed trust, but we still had trust in our media institutions back then, and we still had relative trust in our executive branch. All of that, was misplaced, but we've seen over the last 2 decades how, that's just been completely lit on fire at this point, and nobody trusts those. But, it wasn't necessarily our fault that we all supported that. However, of the people who knew that the mainstream narrative was a lie, it probably would have been George W. Bush. He probably knew that WMDs were a lie, and so did a lot of the other establishment. And they lied to us, and so we made an incorrect support decision with incorrect information. I think everyone being a lot more skeptical these days of the mainstream media narrative is certainly a good thing. But it really makes you wonder, why was one man unilaterally invading a country? Why did George Bush suddenly think of himself instead of Putin? It's again, Freudian slips, pretty brutal.
Yeah, and can you imagine a country having rigged elections,
or barring political opponents from appearing on the ballot?
Oh wow, that never happens.
Yeah, oh no. Let's see here. So also, I would note that George Bush blamed his slip on his age at 75. Joe Biden's currently 79. So
and his presidency is not yet over, but he's getting closer to that every day.
Well, and we do know that presidents do seem to mix up countries when they get older, as Joe Biden has done on numerous occasions. What was the really bad one where he called for like an invasion of a country that was the wrong country? Do you remember that?
Oh shit! Yeah.
Was it Syria?
I forget. I think it might have been Syria.
Yeah, I think he said Syria when he meant another country, or it was vice versa. That was a few months ago, but it was pretty. That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So, alrighty. Ready for our next story?
Yes. Next story is on Ukraine.
Are you sure it's not Iraq?
I'm not really sure anymore because I guess any country will do. This next update is going to be on Sweden then, instead of Ukraine.
Okay. Why did I not make slides for these?
Because you hate me.
Yeah, I do hate you. I'm just going to go back to the slide that we used. That was the map break where, one of the things we forgot to talk about with the baby formula is that apparently ICE bought and shipped like a bunch of pallets of baby formula to the
border.
The border, like the detention camps at the border. So, so the map break here is that the U.S., the government is currently purchasing crack pipes, which was also, that was a reconfirmed story this week. We didn't cover it because, we already covered that. I don't really care when the mainstream media reconfirms something if we've already confirmed it like months ago. So I guess thanks for the New York Times to catch up to Direwolf Media. America's got crack pipes, Mexico got baby formula, and then the Ukraine got $40 billion.
And the ironic part of that is, so all these immigrants are coming to our border that apparently have so many babies they need us to provide the baby formula for them. And because we're allowing them to come across the border and become our problem, we're having to feed them, right?
Yes.
Now, Mexico is not having a baby formula shortage. So why are they taking a baby formula from us? Why are they staying in fucking Mexico and get the formula there?
Yeah, at a certain point, our economy is going to reach the point where I don't know if it's going to be better to come over here. At this point, they're just only coming over here because the Democrats are promising to squeeze the American citizen for everything that we're worth and just give it away for free. 20 years ago, they would have come here looking for employment. Now they're coming here looking for handouts. So
imagine someone breaking your house and then yelling at you for not having peanut butter or some shit in your fridge. Well, you'll put peanut butter in your fridge, but you get my point, right? They're coming to our country illegally, and they're demanding.
What psychopath are you?
I don't know. You don't put peanut butter in the fridge.
You're just trying to hide it from your dogs.
If you leave it out, the dogs will take it very quickly. Anyways,
so speaking of Ukraine and $40 billion.
Exactly. So Sweden and Finland are both countries that are well known for refusing to join NATO initially for many years since the Cold War, and preferring to remain neutral and also free from the burdens of NATO's membership and what that all requires and entails. All 30 existing members of NATO have agreed to accept Finland and Sweden, except for Turkey, who has objected to their entry on the grounds that it would further antagonize Russia. Sweden currently
I agree.
Yeah, I actually agree too. So Also, fuck them. So Sweden currently has sanctions on Turkey, which is kind of awkward for them to become part of NATO when they are currently sanctioning Turkey and also refusing to extradite Turkish criminals.
Let's see here. So NATO countries promised to devote 2% of their GDP towards joint military funding. In reality, some countries pay far more, like us, while others pay far less, like everyone else, or nothing at all. The U.S. pays 81% of NATO's military funding, while also being the chief supplier of command troops, meaning blood, and weapons. When NATO bravely deploys to war...
Sorry, that was a mixture of two figures. We pay 24%, and it's $81 billion.
I have become a purveyor of misinformation, and it's Dyer's fault.
It was my fault. 24%, yes. $81 billion.
All right, admonish. When NATO bravely deploys to war, they are selflessly sacrificing American blood and treasure on behalf of Europe.
Yes, so to avoid sacrificing their own lives, they will bravely sacrifice ours.
It's really beautiful if you think about it.
It's not.
Oh.
So the support...
Is it brave? No, it's not that
it's
either.
brave
Damn.
and beautiful, yes. The support the U.S. has already given to Ukraine already is in addition to the $81 billion the U.S. gives to NATO every year, which again is 24% of their total budget. With the weapons and extensive intel and quote-unquote training support we have already given them, they have managed to stall Russian forces and even push them back in some areas. Despite Ukraine's success, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are voting to send an additional $40 billion in support to Ukraine.
Now, I don't know if you're going to go through any of this, but from my understanding, like the $40 billion, to give some context to it, was like way in excess of what we had been spending in Afghanistan for like even the last several years combined. Do you know any of those stats? I know I was hearing them, but we didn't find or track any of those down.
So I did look at it, and there was a large amount of military weapons as well as humanitarian. Like a large portion of it is food, water, and those kinds of things for refugees. There also, though it's $40 billion, apparently there was another allocation of $10 billion that wasn't related to the specific bill. That's also going at the same time period. So it's actually $50 billion.
Yeah, I wonder how many Democrats have family members working for those NGOs that are going to be providing the water and food.
Yeah. I bet those NGOs won't be getting droned.
Yeah, maybe we should. So, though it is in our best interest that Russia loses to Ukraine, it's not our sole interest. Obviously, foreign policy is a bunch of competing interests, and most politicians like to make it a this thing or you're a foreign adversary.
It's also not only our interest; it's everyone else in NATO, their interest too.
Yeah. So yeah, and I would being more of I would say I'm a peacenik or a dove. I'm just more libertarian, which means no frivolous spending on wars. I would say yes, it is in our interest that Russia loses to Ukraine. However, I have a disagreement with how we are going about doing that, and for me, disagreeing with the method by which we achieve that goal, people like Dan Crenshaw and all the Democrat Party would call me a traitor and a Russian asset. And that's the problem with the current state of rhetoric in America right now.
And I can confirm that.
Yes.
Fox is a Russian asset. Anyway, continue.
Yes, but I'm not a traitor. I'm no traitor to Russia. Let's see here. So, though it is in our best interest that Russia loses to the Ukraine, it is not our sole interest. We have already donated far more money by percentage of the capability than the other 29 nations in NATO. Sweden and Finland have not donated anywhere close to that commitment. And at this point, we don't want to be required to defend nations that refused to promise to defend the U.S. when they didn't feel threatened. So at NATO, for the money that we've poured, trillions of dollars over the last, I think, 30 or 40 years that NATO has been in existence, I think 30 years. And we have been doing stuff with that trillions of dollars. We have been building up capacity. We've been building bases. We've been designing strategies. We've been integrating militaries, that sort of stuff. And for Finland and Sweden, they laughed at us, and they created social programs with the money that they would have otherwise been sending to NATO. They didn't care at all. They said we were goofy. They said that we were war hawks. They didn't care about it at all. They made fun of us. And now all of a sudden they feel threatened. They want to jump in last minute. Well, you can jump in last minute if you backfill all of the preparation we've been doing for the last 3 decades. You can't just have us be, oh, well, we see you guys have been building these nice defenses, and I know that we made fun of you when we weren't threatened, but now that we're threatened, we suddenly agree with you. We think that you're right. And it's like, okay, well, if you think that we're right, then you can also pay back the back funding. I mean, this is essentially an insurance policy that they waited until after they crashed their car to get the insurance policy. Well, I've never crashed my car. Other people who crash their cars are really goofy, and I don't see any reason to buy insurance, so I'm going to drive without insurance for 20 years. And then all of a sudden I crash my car and I call up my insurance agent and say, hey, I thought you were pretty silly for trying to sell me that insurance before, but now you know what? I would really like to buy it. And they're going to tell you no, because you don't just get to get the insurance when you need it. The point of insurance is that you're paying into the pool when you don't need it, because you're spreading out the cost, or you're supposed to be. And so for Sweden and Finland to join NATO at this point is a total betrayal of what NATO was supposed to be. And it's really
make NATO stronger.
It's pure theft. Yeah, exactly. Finland and Sweden do not bring anything of value to the alliance. They do not.
It does antagonize Russia further, and it doesn't make NATO any stronger. Not that I'm really antagonizing your adversary isn't really what the problem for me here, but there's other problems. Namely, among them is, think back over 30 years ago when the founding members of NATO went to Sweden and Finland and said, hey, if we're attacked, will you defend us? If you can promise that if you're attacked, we'll defend you. And they're like, nah, we're good. We're not going to defend you. We think that you guys preparing and your militaries and you spending your guys' GDP to defend Europe.
I don't know what they're so worried about. I mean, I guess I don't really want a Russian tank breaking down on my street, but there are worse things.
Sweden and Finland were making a calculation that they're going to build up their army strong enough that just by being near them will be defended. We don't need to invest in it.
And they made, the other calculation they made too is they knew if they ever really needed the defense that NATO would cuck and let them in at the last minute. They knew that would happen too. I mean, that was the calculation that they made. And if NATO hadn't let them in, they would have sat on the world stage and complained that, oh, look at the silly Westerners, they're not letting us in, and aren't they so rude to us? And, that would have probably swayed other politicians, because then they'd feel embarrassed amongst their politician peers. Not that the populations would really care. And that was the calculation that they most likely made, is that it'd be cheaper to sit it out, and they knew that if they ever really needed it, like they do now, that the West would just allow them in.
Yep, they calculated that they could get the defense of NATO without being part of NATO and never being obligated to protect other NATO countries. They want to be protected but not protect others. So that's why I'm not, super keen on them joining NATO, because they're only doing it to save their own asses, not because they actually intend or have actually,
I'd love to see
defending the Union.
I'd love to see when this is over, if they continue paying and being a part of it. I'd love to see
Most of the countries in NATO don't pay. At least not what their obligation is, rather.
Yes, and wasn't Trump so rude when he told them to pay their fair share? Is that your part to read, or is it mine?
That's yours for now.
What, here?
Yes.
Okay. Republican Senate Leader Mitch McConnell.
Oh,
said,
shit! You
highlighted the spot that's yours, and then
I did miss something. So, okay. If you say I remind you, we don't have a defense treaty with Ukraine. What we have done was beyond what was required of us. All the support we've already given them is beyond what was required of us. And I think it was strategically wise to make sure that we made Russia weaker. We did so because defending Ukraine was a vehicle for weakening Russia's military and preventing them from expanding their control over resources, which they then could use against us and our allies. We could say that even if Ukraine fell tomorrow, you could reasonably say that we achieved those strategic goals. Russia, win or lose, right now, as things are, is fucked either way. If they win, they will now be saddled with having to rebuild most of Ukraine and likely either way, suffer the economic and societal effect of having angry refugees that have no city left, living within their borders, requiring food, requiring care, not having jobs because they blew up all their jobs. They blew up their farms. They blew up all the businesses. If Russia tries to occupy Ukraine, it will be a huge detriment, a huge drain on them. And if Russia loses, the effect on their willingness to go to war again would be affected as well. They would be weakened. Their military would have been demoralized and low on supplies. They would either way, win or lose. They're not likely to try to invade another country after Ukraine has put up such a big fight.
Well, and you're not wrong, but let's not give them quarter on making one mistake compound another. So yes, we would like to see Russia not have a stranglehold over Europe with their energy and be able to use that against our quote unquote allies. I mean, I think you're referring to Germany, who's probably not our best ally.
Not really.
The only reason why we're now seeing a war in Russia, a war in Ukraine from Russia, is because of decisions that people like Angela Merkel made in Germany to allow Russia to sell them gas when America was ready to go. A NATO ally was ready to go to provide them energy. And instead, most of Europe and mostly Germany became deathly reliant on Russian fuel, Russian natural gas and petrol. And all they had to do was not do that, and then Russia wouldn't have any leverage over them, and we probably would not have seen the invasion of Ukraine. We may have for other reasons, but it wouldn't have been as devastating to Europe as it currently is. And all of that for, all this talk about Trump being a madman war hawk. Well, I mean, he was the one telling Germany, hey, don't get yourself wrapped up in this Russian energy. It's going to be bad for you in the long run. They're going to be able to use it against you. America has plenty of energy production. You can buy it from us. You can buy it from the NATO alliance, and you're going to be much better off if Russia ever does anything. And also, you're not going to be funding Russia to build their war machine. A lot of the money that Russia has that they, I guess, threw into the fire of Ukraine, a lot of that recently came from Europe buying energy from them. Russia wasn't having a lot of exports of energy up until Europe decided to become wholly reliant on them. And why did Europe become wholly reliant on Russian energy? Well, because some mentally disabled girl, I don't think that she counts as autistic. I think she's just mentally disabled because they said that she talks to carbon. That's not autism. That's just,
What?
Yeah, you didn't hear about that? Yeah. So this little Swedish girl, was it Greta Thunberg, talking to the carbon atoms in the wind, and she told all of Europe, you have to stop drilling for oil, and so they did. They stopped their nuclear plants too, and then all of a sudden, well, we're cold, so we're gonna have to buy our oil from somewhere, and they got it from Russia. This all led to Russia having money and leverage to invade Ukraine. And yes, now that they've invaded Ukraine, now it's okay. Well, it would be nice that they would, consume their war resources and make themselves weaker as a country. That's certainly a goal now. But the point is that the only reason why we are in this situation in the first place is because of the mismanagement of the West by European leaders and them making fun of Trump for telling them, hey, stop doing this. It's going to lead to bad things.
Right. We definitely shouldn't have been in the situation, but now that we're in the situation, that is the best play with the cards we currently have, thanks to people like Biden. I want to point out that actually, we're talking about that in a later section. My apologies.
All right. So Republican Senate Leader Mitch McConnell said that Congress has a, quote, moral responsibility. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what I need. I need the Congress to just be the Vatican and make moral decisions. To support a sovereign democracy's self-defense. No, we don't. That's what if we had a responsibility to that, we would have made a treaty with them.
Yeah, I'd rather, if NATO is all wanting to support Ukraine, then use the $81 billion we're already giving them every year. Use that money to support Ukraine. We need to send additional. And if they think that's not enough, there's 29 other countries that are closer to the problem, that probably are a little more invested, that probably could, actually put some more money themselves.
Yes. All right. So it's a nice sentiment that we are going to be making moral decisions now instead of treaty decisions. But Ukraine is, not really a democracy. I think that we should be more concerned about reviving our own ailing republic. The fairness of our elections is seriously in question, which we're going to talk about here in a second. Mobs of violent thugs have been ravaging through our cities to win the political support of with the political support of the Democrat Party. Our society is arguing about the merits of chopping off the dicks and breasts of our children, and that being the children that manage to survive the annual abortion holocaust, where children may be born after 9 months of gestation and doctors have a conversation with the parents about whether or not they should die. We got all of that, and none of that seems to tickle the moral compass of Mitch McConnell there. Millions of illegal immigrants are invading our country every day, and the economy is a freight train it's already a crashed freight train, but now the off the rails train wagons are now rolling towards a cliff. The train's already off the tracks, but now it's rolling off the cliff as well. And we literally have babies being taken to hospitals because their parents simply cannot find food for them. It came out this week that 14 states have sufficiently miscounted. So again, Mitch McConnell wants to talk about unfair elections, and Bush can talk about unfair elections too. So it came out this week that 14 states had a significant miscount in their populations during the 2020 census, which meant that the number of electors, we use the census to apportion the House of Representatives. So this means that the apportionment of the House of Representatives for the next Congress is wrong, because the number of electors given to each state based on their population, the populations were miscounted.
Yeah, so of the 14 states that had miscounted or had wrong counts, 8 of those states overcounted. And of those 8 that overcounted, 6 of them were in majority Democrat states, whereas 2 were in majority GOP states. So that means that there was a more population towards states that were Democrat.
Which means that you'll get more Democratic.
More electors, yeah.
Representatives.
Exactly. And then for the states that undercounted,
I forgot it. Yeah, the Electoral College. Yeah, you're right, because the Electoral College is a mirror of the Congress. So yeah, if you've got more House of Representatives representing your state, then you're also going to have more electoral votes.
Exactly.
Jesus Christ.
Right. So it affects the vote count each state gets. Now, as far as undercounting, there was 5 states that were GOP states that were undercounted, taking away how many votes they could have, whereas only 1 Democrat state was undercounted.
Okay, so you're telling me that 14 states were miscounted, and all of the ones except for 2 that were overcounted were Democrat, and all of the ones that were undercounted except for 1 were GOP.
Yes.
Oh wow, that's
and
crazy.
Also
that's just totally a coincidence. It must be random happenstance, right?
Yeah. Now for the Democrat state, the 1 Democrat state that was undercounted, it was undercounted by only 2%, whereas the Republican states that were undercounted undercounted by 5% on average.
Yeah. So we had so some of the numbers here. So we got Democrat states again, and we base these off of the 2020 election. So states that voted Democrat, that went blue in the 2020 election, that were overcounted, was Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York, Delaware, Hawaii. Hawaii was overcounted by almost 7%. You had Rhode Island overcounted by 5%. Delaware 5.5% overcount. And then again, like Dyer said, only 2% undercounted for Illinois, which is where Chicago's at. So you had all these, 6 blue states severely overcounted by, 5% or more. Not anywhere close to offsetting the undercount in Illinois. I mean, this isn't, 2 dozen, 6, 1 dozen of the other, or whatever. This isn't going to come out. I totally messed that up. This is not going to come out in the wash of averages. This is clearly biased in one direction. And then for the undercount on the GOP side, you had Ohio was overcounted by 1.5%. You had Utah was overcounted by 2.6%. But then you had undercounted. You had Texas was undercounted by 2%. You had Tennessee was undercounted by 5%. Arkansas undercounted by 5%. You had Mississippi was undercounted. Florida was undercounted by at least 2%. So this seems to be going in one direction. It's not something that's like, oh, well, we overcounted some states. It was a random happenstance how the numbers fell. It's just statistical variance. No. This seems clearly a little bit of bias going on here. And again, this is a big deal because you're going to have more of these blue states sending more representatives to the House of Representatives, and they're going to have more electoral votes because of this. We already know from previous reporting that states like California, that they were getting as many as 5 electoral votes and 5 extra representatives due to their population of illegal immigrants, because they're said, well, we have to count these people. Like, okay, yeah, you can count them, but you can't count them for your representations of citizens, not of non-citizens. So you already have the Democrats kind of pushing the boundaries here of stuff that people don't really pay attention to. I mean, the census it's not a really big deal. It's typically not a hot button political issue. And the Democrats are taking advantage of the fact that nobody really pays attention to that to slowly shift and nudge their electoral counts to try to make those blue states even more powerful and the red states even less powerful. It would seem at this point that the Democrats are not going to have much success in flipping states, and it appears that they're losing some of their states as well. That's based off of the direction that state legislatures are going. State legislatures have been trending Republican for quite a few years now, and that doesn't seem to be a trend that's balking at all. So what the Democrats are trying to do is that, well, we only have the blue states that we have, and we're not going to be picking up the red states anytime soon. So what we need to do is make those blue states more powerful and make the red states less powerful. Now, NPR, who initially broke this story, claims that, well, the percentage differences wouldn't have really made a difference. I don't know how you're off by 7% on some of these states, and that wouldn't make a difference. I mean, that's a lot of percent to be off of. I don't know what the final number is, but this would definitely have shifted a few of these votes. And, whether it's 1 or 2 or 10 or 11, it doesn't really matter. It means that the numbers are wrong and the electoral representation is wrong.
Yes. And if you had any other country that had miscounting to this degree and that led to additional votes going to one state over another that isn't fair, isn't proportional, then people would say that was a rigged election.
Yes. So my theory on how this all came about, why was it that red states seem to be undercounted while blue states seem to be overcounted? Well, there's a couple of factors here, but I think one of the main ones is that ballot counters it's the same issue that affects ballot counters. So lefty organizations like to stuff your local election committees and your ballot counters with leftists, people that are affiliated with leftist organizations, also people who have a lot of extra time on their hands. Whereas this typically was a function that was taken over by retirees of both parties. The last few years, you've seen these get out to vote campaigns. You've seen these nonprofits set up by Facebook and all these leftist organizations that seem to cultivate leftist activists to go volunteer, quote unquote, for counting ballots, for running polling stations. And what do we see? Well, we see these weird F curves that come out of Wisconsin, and we see, oh, oops, we lost all of these veteran ballots. Oh, oops, we lost a bunch of ballots in Georgia that were supposed to be from service members that were deployed. You see all these kind of weird things, and they all seem to shift in one direction, and that's because you have these nonprofits stuffing, these George Soros organizations, stuffing as many leftists into these volunteer areas as you can. Well, what do we have for census? Well, we have a campaign to hire census takers. I'm sure you guys remember those commercials last year or the year before of the federal government looking to hire you to work on a temporary basis as a census taker. You go to people's house, you ask them did they fill out their census, did they get their census, you can give them their census, you can collect their census. And so my theory is that you probably had a similar infiltration by leftist Soros-backed organizations of leftists into these positions, where you have your census taker isn't a random sampling of American politics. They're actually all leftists. And so maybe similar to what is suspected to have happened with the ballots, maybe they just, forgot to go visit some red areas, or they lost a lot of census cards from redder areas, and maybe they found a bunch of census cards from blue areas. Maybe they were able to double count certain people if they were homeless, or if they were, maybe living in a different state at the time. Maybe they were able to do that. And there's a lot of possibilities for just nudging the numbers just a little bit to get those census numbers up in blue areas and down in red areas. And then I think another big factor, if you want to be a little bit less conspiratorial, is density. Red areas are notoriously low density. A single census volunteer or someone hired to be a census taker, if they're in a blue area, they can walk around the city and hit 50 to 100 apartment rooms in a day, because they're all right next to each other. If you want to walk around to 100 houses in some red areas, it might take you all week to do that. And so it's a density issue where it's much easier to count high density areas than it is to count low density areas. Not to mention, you also have Republicans, conservatives, and libertarians a little bit more resistant to being taken of their census because they see it as kind of an intrusion. The Constitution states very specific things that are allowed to be accounted for, and then the census office decides, we want to ask a bunch of extra questions, and a lot of people are resistant to answering those extra questions because they see it as violative of the Constitution, and they're absolutely correct on that. But that just means that they're less likely to be counted. So there's a lot of factors that would seem to suggest it's harder to count red areas, and a lot of factors that seem to suggest the people counting the census probably matter what their politics are. And that's where you get these numbers, where you see, how did Hawaii get 7% miscount? I mean, it's an island. They're trapped there. I mean, it should be pretty easy to figure out who's there.
Sorry.
Yeah. And Florida, I mean, it should be pretty easy to count how many times your truck got shot at when you were driving around trying to take people's censuses. I think that this is shenanigans. Is this going to go anywhere? Obviously not. I mean, you'd have to have some pretty high level statisticians that were non-biased looking at this. So I don't think that this is going to go anywhere, but it's certainly going to add to the heap that our side feels like we've been not that we're complaining, not that we're taking on a victim complex, but that there's real tangible things that are being shifted legally, being done to us, that are legally making it more difficult for us to be represented, more difficult for us to vote or to be counted for our vote, etc. There's a lot of tangible things that are just right there on the fringes, and no single activity that the left is doing is going to make up their whole agenda, but all of them combined is going to shift so that they have more power in Congress, more power that a well-counted vote wouldn't allow them to have. And so that's why they have to do these little nudges, these little shifts, just a few extra ballots here, a few less on the census over here, and all of a sudden they're able to take over and flip cities and states.
Yep. This last story, do you want to cover it, or can we wait?
We'll just skip reading it, and we'll just look at the charts. So we did this last time. So we set a new record again for border crossings in the month of April. Was 234,000 encounters, which encounters really doesn't mean too terribly much. Let me see if I can get this to widen out here. Nope, it does not want to widen out. Oh, there we go. Alrighty. So again, we pointed this out last time. You can see the red line was 2020, which was very low and pancaked. I want you to ignore the red line because that was during COVID. 2019 was kind of the last year that we had a normal immigration flow, and you can see that immigration gets started counting in October. So you can see towards the end of the year in the winter time up through Christmas, we have a low level in 2019. And then, February hits, March hits, April hits, and all of a sudden it starts getting warmer, and you see these seasonal spikes every summer. Again, 2020 is an outlier because of COVID. But you see the seasonal spike where it gets pretty high in May and June in the warmer months. And then it starts dropping off as it starts getting cooler and it starts heading towards the fall. And then you had that cycle. You had the seasonal cycle every year for the last 10 years. And then what happened in 2021? Well, Joe Biden, he takes office in January. So our October to January looks like 2019. Then Joe Biden takes office, and all of a sudden the seasonal spike, it takes off a little bit earlier than it did in previous years. So that's a little bit concerning. The seasonal spike starts a little bit earlier. It went quite a bit higher. And then what do we see in June and July is that the seasonal spike, instead of returning back down, it just keeps going up, and it stays high. And then we get into 2022, still at that high level. We saw the flow. We didn't see any ebb in the seasonality. And so it stayed at that high level. And then we get to February, and again, we see the spike start a little bit earlier, but it's spiking from the previous spike.
It's spiking from the previous spike.
Yeah, so there was, it flowed, but it didn't ebb. It's got to go in and out. It's like the tide came in. Instead of the tide going back out, the tide just came in again.
Imagine looking at this graph and saying, "Yeah, there's no problem here."
Yeah, that's again. I think that's a good analogy too. Is the tide comes in and the tide goes out, and then all of a sudden the tide comes in, stays there, and then the next one comes in. And you're like, "Oh, heck, that's a lot of water," but it's people. So again, another record. Again, these are encounters. Man, this is just off the charts wild. You've got in 2022 again, so from October to April, that is 7 months worth of time so far. We are at 1,300,000 encounters up through April, from October to April. Just in the full 12 months of 2021, we were at 1,734,000. So at this rate, we will surpass the 2021 numbers probably by June. So I would say probably over the course of 9 months, we will have had as much immigration as we had in 2021. I mean, this is going up fast, and I'll be, kind of terrified to see a year from now when this flow does not ebb again, it stays high, and then it spikes again. I think that's going to be terrifying too. Not to mention, you've got the story that we didn't read is that Title 42, which is the act that allows us to more rapidly deport people because of COVID. The Biden administration has been trying desperately to get that removed, even though they've been keeping up other COVID restrictions. And another judge, I believe a Trump-appointed judge, has blocked the removal of Title 42 again this week. So there was that previously happened, and then the DOJ was able to kind of work around that. And then another federal judge kind of restarted the process. And the federal government doesn't have a choice but to kind of restart the process every time a federal judge does this. So hopefully we just kind of have federal judges continuously peppering the administration until we can get a new administration. That would be the hope. But for now, I guess we're at, I don't know. I mean, would you call that safe that we only have 230,000 crossings instead of 270,000 crossings if they get rid of Title 42? I mean, does it even matter at this point?
It's like if someone got shot 100 times and you patch up one of the holes.
Well, no. It would be like if you gave the person the option of, like, you just shot them 100 times, and you said, well, I could shoot you 150 more times, but I'm only going to shoot you 100 times.
Yeah. Sounds like a deal, right? Like, that person...
It's not a deal for the person shooting. Have you seen the price of ammo these days?
Exactly. I mean, really, they're the one suffering.
Yeah. we just do not have enough ammo for double taps anymore. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, well, if the zombie apocalypse happens, we're fucked.
Yeah. So, and why is this happening? Well, because the border enforcement has become what they describe as an Uber agency for border crossers. They've essentially become coyotes themselves, illegally pulling people in for money, your money, and then also you've got they're focused on Mayorkas is focused on creating these bureaus of disinformation, these ministries of truth, and focusing on you, the American citizen, and they're not really focused on the border. We also have our Congress happily spending $40 billion on Ukraine and their border problem, yet we can't get $20 billion for our border. Been asking for that for decades at this point. So the government hates you. Most people in government hate you. Most Republicans that claim to be on your side, they kind of hate you too. Ted Cruz is all in on not defending the border and giving $40 billion to Ukraine. And the Department of Homeland Security is doing the exact opposite of what their namesake would suggest. I think at this point, if you're still in CBP, you should quit, because at this point, having less CBP officers assisting the migration would actually slow it down. The only thing that ICE is doing right now is ensuring that more, and this may sound a little bit morbid, the only thing that ICE is doing is ensuring that more migrants, more illegal immigrants survive their trip. If they weren't there, quote unquote, rescuing them from the desert, more of them would die out there and less of them would make the attempt. So really at this point, if you are in ICE or CBP, you are part of the problem. You are betraying your country. And at this point, I think that is well enough established. You could have been forgiven in years past and even in months past for maybe not knowing. I think at this point, your intentions were surely admirable when you signed up. But at this point, I think that I would say probably a lot of the German army in 1930, I would think that a lot of them signed up for admirable reasons too. And then slowly, what their organization did shifted, and you've got to be able to account for that shift. You can't just say, oh, well, Homeland Security, they've got the name Homeland Security, and that's an honorable thing to do, and then just agree with the name being the justification for what they do. You have to actually look at what is going on and make your decision for yourself if it's a moral thing or not. And at this point, I think that there's more than enough information that what Homeland Security is doing is hurting and harming the country to the point that it accounts for treason. And so I think that whenever we have the next administration, I certainly think that a lot of the CBP higher-ups, I think that they should be arrested and tried for treason at this point. And I think that maybe we need to start targeting the lower level guys too. I don't think that there's an excuse for some border agent making $35,000 a year and, oh, woe is him, while he illegally traffics a human being into this country. I don't see that as a class issue, or I don't think that treason has a class. I think that you can be poor and commit treason. I think that you can have a low-income menial job and commit treason. I think that you can be rich and commit treason. I'm income agnostic when it comes to treason, and I think that even your lower-level guys in the CBP currently are guilty of that. And I think that there's more than enough evidence that they know what it is that they're doing, and they could stop it, but they're not.
Yeah, you are required to not follow unlawful orders. So,
and I believe, I could be wrong on this, but I believe that trafficking a human being is unlawful.
Yep.
Okay. Just curious there. Okay.
All right. So I think it's it for tonight. So are we doing a show next weekend?
As far as I know, I am available. So
cool.
Yes.
I'm available too. So we'll see you guys next Sunday. It's been a good show. I'm a bit tired. It's a bit late. But thank you guys very much for coming and enjoying the show with us. We'll see you guys next weekend. Direwolf out.
All right, Trees signing off. See you guys.
Oops.
Buy some gas.